Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Concordia University's Force Space. Thank you for joining us for today's event, the Concordia Undergraduate Academic Conference of Communication Studies, affectionately known as CUACCS. Just to help situate you, we are streaming to YouTube live from Force Space. We are located here on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. Here at Force Space, we work with our university community to help mobilize knowledge with daily activities examining research questions and projects happening across the university. We're running today's event as a live stream Zoom meeting also. So those of you joining us there, we would love your comments and questions. Pop those into the chat. We can read them out during Q&As, etc. Those of you here in the space, similar deal. If you have any comments or questions, just raise your hand. We'll bring a microphone over so that others can hear as well. Okay. With that, it's very much my pleasure to hand things over to a member of the CUACCS coordinating team, Chloé Peel. Good morning, Chloé.
Good morning. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this year's iteration of the Concordia Undergraduate Academic Conference of Communication Studies, or CUACCS for short. We're really proud to revive this conference, which hadn't been held in person, we think, since 2021. CUACCS couldn't have happened without a lot of support. In particular, professors Chris Gutierrez, Alessandra Renzi, and Stephen Monterio, who helped immensely in guiding our process of planning this event, and Simone Lucas, Magdalena Olzanowski, and Owen Chapman, who are kindly moderating our panels today. CUACCS also couldn't have happened without logistical support from Fourth Space, who have been crucial in organizing the practicalities of this event in their space today, as well as ASFA and the Comms Guild, who have kindly funded this event. We're also very grateful to all the students who submitted their work. Thanks to them, we have an exciting and diverse program ahead. This conference aims to do many things. It is an effort to acknowledge some of the academic efforts of students in our program that often go unseen outside of grading, a place for undergraduate students to gain experience in a conference setting, and a place to share love of communication studies. This year, we chose not to set a specific theme. Instead, we chose to give students the freedom to showcase the work that they're most proud of or most passionate about, to give an idea of the diverse range of ideas and research happening within the Communication Studies department at Concordia. There are flyers which include today's program located at the back of the room. But just to give you a quick overview of what to expect today, we're going to open with a keynote speech on multiverse media as a reflection of capitalist late-stage anxiety. After that, we'll move into a screening of some research production pieces that touch on themes of archive and its role in our everyday lives, followed by a Q&A. After lunch, we'll shift into two panels. The first one about the process of creating and researching a Wikipedia article, the second on mediated affect. We'll close the day with a final keynote on heteropessimism and romance novel covers. Following the panels, we're going to have an exhibition of research creation works, with listening and viewing stations, as well as an interactive sound exhibition. We're going to break from 12:15 to 1:15 for lunch. We're going to have falafels, pita, dip from Nilüfer, but you're welcome to explore other options on campus. You'll have a whole hour. Before we get started, this is your last call to grab some coffee and pastries at the back of the room from Pitsmay before we start the presentations. Finally, I want to encourage you all to engage fully, not only with the food station at the back, but also with the presentations. Each presentation includes time for questions, and we'd really love to see lively exchange of ideas throughout the day. Thanks again for being here, and without further ado, here's your first speaker, Leo.
All right, so I will be speaking first, and I am presenting on alternate universes and anxious affect, multiverse media as the cycle media of late-stage capitalism. All right, so firstly, understanding multiverse media as a genre, you have to understand how genre functions as a tool, as like a categorical model, not only as a prescriptive descriptor of different forms of media and the way they can take, but kind of how they can function more holistically. So I've tracked that from how genre functions as a tool to how multiverse media functions as a genre, to Berlant's genre flail and the reflexivity within that, and then the context within anxious affect under late-stage capitalism, with the case studies of Everything Everywhere All at Once and Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. So first, I looked to Daniel Chandler's An Introduction to Genre Theory. His main conclusions are that genre is incredibly difficult to define with any specific framework. What constitutes a genre in one sense will not necessarily constitute a genre in a different sense. That this is largely informed by cultural contexts, and that it is only useful within those contexts, and that it is often only described in retrospect. He cites that you can't really map out all of the different genres and how they function, so he kind of looks more to how different theorists are using genre. I've tried to vaguely organize them by how they connect, but obviously you can kind of loop things back around and such. So David Bordwell, who is a very prominent film studies theoretician, he looks to the collection of categories that are used in film criticism, but notes the complications of a genre versus a mode, a genre versus a formula, and then the practical versus theoretical use, i.e. what film critics will use to describe trends that emerge within different films, are not what viewers will necessarily pick up on. And then he notes that there are no necessary and sufficient conditions of genre that exist. He specifically looks to spatiotemporality, authorship, consumption format, narrative series, and cycle. Cycle is the one that's a bit more vague, and it is specifically referring to a combination of themes, but also spatiotemporal contexts and narrative elements. So the fallen woman films of the 1920s and 1930s in America and Western Europe is an example of this, where they reflect a lot of like moral attitudes at the time, but they are tied to a specific context. The big one of this is film noir, where there is really extensive debate about whether or not film noir is a genre, if it's specifically in the context of like post-World War disillusionment, and there is discourse as to whether or not Japanese films that match the thematic elements and the cultural attitudes can be noir simply because they aren't American. Robert Stam looks more on categorical models, such as the story content, whether or not certain performers are involved. The medium specificity that he notes is the musical as being a genre, artistic prestige specifically in the context of art house films, the identities represented, racial or sexual, as well as the narrative location. So this is not the context that it is produced in, but the narrative or the location that the film takes place in. So the Western is the example of this that he cites. But he notes that these often fall into the pitfalls of having issues with extension, so either being too narrow or too vague, normativism, which has very set criteria, monolithic definitions that limit any one piece of media to being one genre or another genre and cannot be both, as well as biologism, which is like the concept of the life cycle of the genre. Integral to this is also the genre flail, which is theorized by Laurent Berlant as being a moment of crisis when a mode of existence is disrupted. So understanding genre as all of those and then some as being more of a mode of existence, the genre flail emerges when there is a disruption to the set of norms that kind of govern how we understand and make sense of a certain context. The example of this in real life could be the lockdowns in 2020, but they also can be found within specifically multiverse media. So this is Miles Morales in Into the Spider-Verse when he meets Spider-Man and has that moment of recognition that something is up and that his life has changed significantly. This is Evelyn from Everything Everywhere All at Once when her husband, Waymond, puts on these like Bluetooth headphones and starts giving her instructions, and she doesn't understand, but she knows that something has changed quite dramatically. This is not a good thing. The genre flail is usually describing moments of crisis, which is reflected by the kind of unease felt by both of the characters in this. Looking to how multiverse media can function as a genre, there are the conventions of content, but also genre functions around what the content is and how the subject of the content is considered. So multiverse media is the most similar to the cycle descriptor, which combines the shared narrative elements and spatiotemporal contexts. Working with this definition, we can understand multiverse media as coming from primarily American Hollywood blockbuster films in the mid-late 2010s to now. And this is useful in identifying cultural reflections of the time. Other markers include the existence of two or more diegetic realities, often utilizing genre to differentiate them. I say two or more, usually there are more than two. However, oftentimes when there are specifically two alternate universes, they don't make the distinction that the narrative is like specifically like dualist, and it opens up the opportunity even though they don't engage with it directly. And then another part of this is the conflict that emerges from this, usually from the very, very direct engagements of these different universes with each other, and they often concern the consequences of choice as like a moral dilemma for the characters. And yeah, narrative comes from a clash of these realities, and they've developed from mid-2010s American blockbuster action films to something that's a little bit more specific and a little bit more unique. So you can kind of track this. I would say that the first major multiverse media was Avengers: Infinity War. While this isn't explicitly a multiverse film in the sense that Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness is, it is the first mainstream film that kind of has such massive levels of convergence of different narratives and like the conflict that emerges between those. Spider-Man: No Way Home was next. It also combines more directly the three different Spider-Man from their own diegeses into one narrative and the conflict that emerges from that. And then Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness is the most direct in that the focus is on the multiverse itself instead of using the multiverse as a narrative tool. Understanding this, you have to look to the dominant anxious affect of culturalism. So Plan C, which is a climate activism group, wrote about the dominant cultural affects under capitalism. They have tracked that each phase of capitalism has its own dominant reactive affect. Our contemporary affect has shifted from misery in the 19th century to boredom in the 20th, and now to anxiety, and that these affects mediate life as we know it under capitalism. Understanding this in the context of specifically Marvel, we can look to the militarism and the kind of justification of security that all of these films produce, as well as the kind of constant looking for further expansion, further convergence, and further development of this plot. Notably, Avengers: Infinity War wasn't enough. They had Endgame, which had to outdo it in every single way, simply because this is how Marvel has set themselves up as like narrative, as like a narrative place in media. Looking further to specific case studies, I worked with Everything Everywhere All at Once primarily, as well as Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, and the analysis holds true for Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Specifically with Everything Everywhere All at Once, this is the most direct example of this, where the possibility of these different multiverses is the issue to be solved, as well as the solution for the characters to use these different universes as a tool to kind of conquer the big bad, but it is also the reason why the big bad exists. Directly, the antagonist, Jogo Tabaki, her whole villain arc is from the fact that she has had all of these expectations placed upon her and that she never feels like she can fulfill them, and it is so distressing that she would rather destroy the entire universe than strive for slightly less than is expected of her. With Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse and Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, these are a bit more positively framed, less so with Spider-Man Across the Universe, again, because the existence of these multiple coexistent realities does cause issue. There is the glitching that occurs where the characters are kind of pushed out and like physically disengage because of the convergences of this, but also in Across the Spider-Verse, the major villain is specifically a character who can go back and forth in between multiverses, and this is what makes him so powerful. Marvel is a very, very interesting kind of media object simply because it is so expansive and so like almost omnipresent in like the American media landscape. It's fascinating to view how it kind of reflects American kind of trends and like cultural considerations, specifically in relation to militarization and capitalism. There's really extensive work done on how the superhero movie emerged post 9/11 to kind of justify increased militarization, increased surveillance in more recent years, but also the concept of like justified destruction. In this specifically, this looks like the shift from specifically national conflicts that are engaged in pre-Infinity War to like extraterrestrial ones, which are also depoliticized to appeal to a broader audience. This also reflects the anxiety of surveillance and militarized threat beyond national context to something that is felt kind of more broadly. Everything Everywhere All at Once similarly reflects this, but it puts it in a very American context and a very individual one. It doesn't look as much to the kind of militarized aspects, but it still has some of the considerations around the possibility and like the benefit of multiverse that can be weaponized. All right, so in conclusion, I don't have a slide for the last one of this, but the concept of the multiverse as a genre not only gives terminology to describe the increasing prevalence of multiverse media, but also the naming and identifying of such media provides useful rhetorical frameworks for engaging these kind of overlooked pieces of media in the concept of the genre flail, through identifying multiverse as demonstrating several markers of the genres that Chandler describes. The justification of this genre becomes a bit more evident. It represents the dominant cultural affect of anxiety, as well as the methods of securitization and performance management that are used to individually mitigate these structural factors as described by Plan C. And pieces of multiverse media individually mitigate these structural fears through providing demonstrations of their kind of unspoken natures. Identifying the kind of diegetic multiverse emergences as having both inherently and comorbidly apocalyptic potential. Work on this genre flail provides context for understanding the relation between structure and possibility, and identifying Brillount's flail as being intrinsic in part of the cinematically established canon within the multiverse media. The emergent genre kind of provides unique rhetorical space for analyzing an oft-felt precarity that goes unexamined or unchecked. If you have any questions, I went under time. If you don't, that is also amazing.
If anyone, oh, perfect.
Hi, thank you so much. It was really enlightening and interesting. So the point that you made about extraterrestrial conflict that is ultimately depoliticized, I was sort of interested in how you saw that piece of the puzzle fit in and how it's sort of reinforcing and creating the ideas you're talking about.
Yeah, so I think that specifically in the context of Marvel, it more so reflects a shift of like the demands of capitalism on the film industry to be increasingly expanding.
This one mistake is stopping you from losing.
Okay. So it's more, I think it is of it being as more so a like production thing of if we can appeal to a wider audience and constantly just be making more and more and hitting like box office record after box office record. It's more reflective of that than specifically the cultural fears. However, I think that it does still kind of shift from like fears that we can understand and fears that we can like place geographically in the world to ones that we can't. Whereas like specifically with superhero movies as a response to 9/11, these are fears of terrorism and happening where we know it. Whereas in Infinity War, these are fears of things that are happening to the entire world. So like climate change is obviously the big one with Plan C of like things that we cannot fully understand or reckon with that will affect all of us, instead of like a fear that something might happen.
Hi, thanks, Leo. That was great. I find the concept of multiverse media really intriguing, and I'm just wondering if there are examples that you might be able to concoct here today, or that you already have in mind that are not filmic examples. You know, whether it's just from other types of media, like video games, for instance, come to mind, but I wasn't sure.
Yeah, I mean, video games especially definitely have a really great potential for this. Honestly, I don't play very many, so I don't have an answer to that. I'm sorry. I'll think about it.
Hello. Oh, this is a very sensitive mic. Do you think that the reason why more and more movies and themes are centering around the multiverse to kind of create like alternate realities to make us seem like the reality that we live in now is not as bad as like other realities and stuff, to kind of like soothe, like ask the question of like what if? Is that also like a reason of why like it's like reassuring people that like it could be worse, but it can also be better? Do you think that relates to like anxieties of the multiverse?
I think that it definitely can. One of the points that I fully glossed over was part of Plan C's like outlining of how anxiety functions as like a very like dominant cultural affect, is that it requires a lot of like self-production management. So you can see this with like the rise of productivity apps and the kind of like the demands that like you are always doing more. And I think I would assume that it would be more related to the expectations of like the possibility on like everything that an individual could potentially accomplish, instead of looking specifically to like how much worse it could be. Like I think that I mean the multiverse media, specifically relating to Phia's question, it reflects very broad cultural fears, but I think that again, like it's horrifying to think about like aliens coming and destroying Earth, but I think that it's more related to like the demands placed on the individual. Or I just haven't done enough research into that specifically.
Just a reminder to those who are joining us online, if you have any questions, you can feel free to pop them in the chat and we'll be sure to read them out. But in the meantime, does anyone here in this space have another question? Oh, one more.
I like the construction that you've developed for like what multiverse media does and is in the like, you know, set of cultural anxieties and expectations that we have of the media that we want to consume. I guess, especially because a lot of this media is meant to be, like especially Marvel, is meant to be like escapist and in some ways like soothing, and like Everything Everywhere All at Once also like serves a very like cathartic function. I'm wondering like, I guess if the multiverse represents this kind of large scale anxiety that we have about these enormous structural problems affecting us on a profound level that we can't grapple with, what are the protagonists in these narratives? How do they relate to us? Like, what am I projecting myself onto? And I guess like you can pick one of the pieces of media that you like or have thought more about. Like, I guess how are the actions and engagements of those protagonists helping soothe my anxiety? I guess. Does that make sense as a question? If it doesn't, I can try and restate it.
No, I think I understand what you're getting at, and I think that like I'll use Everything Everywhere All at Once just because I think that it's the strongest and most like literal example of this. I think that like a lot of people did find comfort in the film because I think that it does kind of come away with like the overarching message of like it's okay, you don't have to be everything. Like in the scene with Jobu and Evelyn, who are like mother and daughter in the film, in case you haven't seen it, there's a scene where there are rocks, and it is the alternate universe where they are rocks and they are sitting on a cliff, and it is completely silent, and then text appears over them, and their conversation is along the lines of like, isn't it kind of nice to not have to do anything? Let's just be a rock. Like that's the conclusion of it, obviously paraphrasing. And I think that like it does function to soothe in terms of like, it can provide challenge to the kind of like dominant narratives of like, you always have to be doing more. Because you have all of this access to information, you always could be doing more and making better choices and like investing in yourself more, like more thoroughly in the right ways. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi. Hi, sorry. Forgive me if this question is something that you touched on your presentation that I missed. I'm not a comm student, I'm just here for pleasure. But I was wondering, when it comes to multiverse media, like, I don't know the specific timeline, but I know that the Spider-Man movies are based off of an older string of Spider-Man comics that used to exist. And I'm also aware that those Spider-Man comics are widely regarded as terrible. And my question is, with stuff like that and like maybe animated shows that have had multiverse media before, or like that maybe appear a bit earlier in the timeline compared to like Infinity War, if you've looked into that, or like how the coverage of multiverse media like in different examples has sort of changed over time, and like the focus of multiverse media has shifted from more of like a fun exploration into something more along the lines of anxiety like your presentation offers.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I haven't looked into that. I think that that's a that would be a very, very interesting place to look, specifically because like comics are very much their own beast, where like notoriously they have so many like different versions and different storylines. I guess that would be an answer to Owen's question earlier about like potential other mediums where you can still find this. Yeah, honestly, no, but it would be fascinating, and I'm sure that you could do a lot more analysis on that.
We have time for one more question. Unless there are none. In which case, thank you, Leo. We'll be right back. We're about to transition into our panel. So we're going to ask our panelists to come up to the table in about a minute here. Hello and welcome back to the Concordia Undergraduate Academic Conference of Communication Studies, CUACCS for short. We're going to keep this intro nice, short, and sweet. So we are heading into our Archives and Tangible Media panel. To help situate you, we are streaming to YouTube Live from Fourth Space, which is located on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. It is my pleasure to hand it over to Professor in the Communications Department, artist Simone Lucas. Simone, welcome.
Can everyone hear me? Okay, there I am. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me as part of your conference. And I'm so excited to introduce you to the panelists and artists today and to discuss their work. So I'm quickly going to read their biographies. Thank you for bearing with me as I read them off my phone. And then we're going to get right into the presentations and screenings. So we have Mackenzie Allard on the end over here, who is a third-year communications and cultural studies student, interested in examining the everyday moments of our lives, putting into question how these moments can tell us more about cultural contexts and movements. We have Maeve Brennagh-Mackie over here, who is a queer intermedia artist, writer, and collaborator based in Tiohtià:ke. Maeve is a third-year bachelor's in communication studies student with a minor in sustainability studies. She learns and creates through participatory community-led research with a current focus on activist art, media, and interventions. We have Thea right over here, Thea Chapman, a multimedia artist from Montreal, Quebec. Her work focuses on moving images, textile, and performance. She is currently in the second year of her undergraduate degree at Concordia in communication studies. She is also a proud member of the Sound Artists Collective, the Very Low Frequency Dub Collective, and Morph Sound System. And finally, we have Constantina Vossos over here, who's a communication studies major at Concordia University. Outside of her coursework, she has a strong interest in animation, particularly independent online series. Her academic work often touches on digital media and fan cultures, with a focus on how creative content circulates in online spaces. So thank you everyone for being here today, and let's get started. So I think we're starting with, am I talking or screening first? Thea, right? So I think they're just queuing up the film. Yes.
Jeg merker at jeg kommer lenger og lenger vekk fra Norge, at vi vokser fra hverandre. Norge liksom, det jo ikke det samme Norge som jeg forlot i 1975.
Nei, det sant. Men det litt gøy også at det jo den jeg kjenner.
Ja.
Den Norge jeg kjenner
veldig glad for at jeg har en kontinuitet. Ja. Hva består tilhørighet i?
Tilhørighet, ja.
Ja. Det noe man føler, tror jeg. Jeg tror ikke det har så mye å gjøre med fakta, så mye som det har å gjøre med veldig, veldig dype følelser.
Ja, jeg tror også det.
Det liksom sånn som gjør at du begynner å gråte når du ikke skjønner hvorfor du begynner å gråte.
Ja.
Den type dype følelser som liksom du ikke har kontakt med, men de der, og de kommer til overflaten av og til.
Ja.
Sånn, den type følelser det som har å gjøre med tilhørighet. tror jeg.
Ça va d'où ça va? Ah ouais? Ça me prend ma deuxième main.
Så vil du si at your home is Canada, eller? What do you
Jeg
consider?
sier ikke det.
Nei.
Nei. Men det jo realiteten. Nå, jeg mener, da jeg flyttet hit, så hadde jeg søster, mor, far, bestemor, onkel, tante, kusine, fetter. Alle var liksom, det var min nærmeste familie, annet enn Peter og Maria og Sara. Nå det liksom bare, de som yngre generasjoner ikke så nærme, for de var ikke der da. Og de som var der da det bare liksom Ingvild og noen kusiner og fetter igjen. Mens her har jeg jo da fått 4 barn, 14 barnebarn. Så her, og mange venner og miljø på alle måter. Så egentlig så har jeg jo nå mye større kulturtilhørighet i Canada enn jeg har i Norge. Men når det gjelder hjertet, så sitter det fast i Norge, og det tror jeg det kommer til å gjøre hele mitt liv.
Ja. Okay, thank you for watching my film. So I'm Thea, and this is a film about my grandmother, Kristen, who immigrated to Canada from Norway 55 years ago when she was 22, which is the age that I'm at now. She has had 4 children and 14 grandchildren, and she's still in Canada. My mother taught me to speak Norwegian when I was a kid, and I moved to Norway when I was 18 for a year. And ever since then, I found a real sense of belonging in Norway, and I've been going back and forth from Norway to Canada. So this film sort of came from a need to express something about that back and forth. I feel in a way that my grandmother passed that down to me because her whole life has been back and forth from Norway to Canada. And every time that I go back to Norway or I come back to Canada, I feel like I adjust. It takes me a couple of weeks. I get there, I get used to it, and then I just have to like rip myself from that place again and adjust all over again. So yeah, I guess that back and forth is really why I decided to make this film. I started off by wanting to question myself about the idea of belonging. So I interviewed a lot of people, not just my grandmother, trying to sort of figure out how my own experience of it could relate to others. But in the end, I realized that everyone's experience is so unique. My friend Alana I interviewed, and I thought we were going to have a very similar experience because she similarly moved to Jamaica, where her family's from, and reconnected with her roots around the same age as me. But Jamaica and Norway are 2 very different places, and we're 2 very different people. So in the end, after doing so many interviews and filming so much, I realized that the material that was the most important was my own family and my own family history. And because this panel is about archives, I was thinking, to me, the most important part in my archival research was the physical images. Like, I was working with audio, I was working with video that I had taken both in Norway and in Quebec. But it was really when I had these tangible images from my grandmother when she was the same age as I am now, and realizing that like these are the same photos that were taken back then, that physicality, it's the same object as it is today and was then. It sort of unlocked something, and everything made sense, and the film worked, and I like cut them up, obviously not physically, but collaged them, and everything started making sense, and then pairing that with the material that I took in Norway kind of brought everything together. And then the other type of archive that was pretty important to me was the knitting, because my grandmother is the one who taught me how to knit, and the pair of mittens that you see me knitting in the film is called selbuvotter, which are, it's like a very traditional type of Norwegian mitten, and I never would have been able to knit those if she hadn't taught me to. So feeling like, as I was knitting them, I was creating my own archive and embodying this relationship that I have with her and relationship that I have with Norway, and bringing them everywhere with me and putting all of my time and environment and emotion and feeling into all of the individual stitches of these mittens was kind of like my own archive building. So in a way, I feel like I do have this film now as my own archive that I can keep, but there's something about that tangibility of having something physical that I think is different, because who knows what's gonna, like, I have this film on my hard drive and on YouTube, and then if my hard drive breaks and YouTube crashes, then it's gone, but I'm gonna have those mittens forever. That's it, that's all I got. Thank you.
And we're gonna watch Constantina's work next.
Stretchy and transforms almost anything? Foam is fun you can feel. Roll it, mold it, or cover it. That's the way you foam it. Look, now you can turn anything into a fabulous foam creation. Transform this wooden fossil into a fierce foam T-Rex. Turn this ordinary toy car into a foaming fast dragster. Or change this plain dollhouse into a foamtastic mansion. Foam. Start all over for many forever.
What's squishy, stretchy, and transforms almost anything?
It's fun you can feel. It's fun you can feel. It's fun you can feel.
Well, it's just that her mom and I want her to be here. Hey, Sky, say hello.
Squish it back and start all over, or let it harden and keep it forever. Take foam outside and the fun will go on. Fun never stops. Just take foam outside and the fun will go on. With foam in your hands, the fun never stops. Just ask anyone who floams, from parents to tots. Floam, it's fun you can feel.
Fun never stops. Just take foam outside and the fun will go on.
And when you're done, squish it back and start all over. And start all over. And start all over.
It's clear I really like the experimental. I think I have some slides. It's fine. So essentially, this piece started out as originally this project that I had created for class, just to practice digital video. And it was during that same semester that I also took a marketing course, and I realized just how much of this commodification and capitalist mindset is actually ingrained within our childhood. And all these, commercials or home videos, these are all actually tellings of that. So this piece engages deeply with archival practices by stitching together, that's like the video. So it stitches together a range of found footage and personal artifacts, including children's commercials, home videos, and abandoned amusement park videos. And this process works by creating by showing how fragmented memory is, and decaying archive, where original emotions and experiences have been altered and hollowed out over time. In the heart of the work, the idea is that you're not simply returning to the past, but encountering its absence. The abandonment amusement park basically becomes this metaphor of memory itself, where it was once this vibrant place that was reduced to ruins. But it is something that created that very memory and created you. Similarly, the children's dance recital, the scenes of kids roaming malls and stores and the scribbled out faces, especially the X's over some children's faces of those memories, visual signs of lost friends, innocence, and identity over time. These marks remind us of how archives we access are incomplete and selectively remembered, and highlight what is missing, erased, or simply inaccessible. So the inclusion, So the inclusion of the clip, one of the clips, which is from a show online called Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared, which is this supposed to represent children's show that turned dark, essentially has a red character that wanders through a desolate place, which in a way reminded me of how the way we view memory is in a third person perspective, especially when we revisit archives of found footage memories in a third person relationship with our own experience. We become spectators in a way to ourselves. This perspective can be unsettling because it reveals how much time has gone and how much distance we have and how we've reshaped what was once felt personal and immediate. At the same time, there is the presence of commodification. I don't know, it's okay. There's a presence of commodification and how capitalism shows how it's woven into our memory from an early age. The very tools we use to capture experience are with video cameras and things our families bought for us, and the spaces in which we, for example, had dance recitals or had fun, like the abandoned amusement parks. These are objects that brought joy to our childhood, but these are still tied to buying things and commodification. As children, we were taught that buying these things, whether it's a toy or those fun experiences, would bring us happiness. And while these experiences did create joy, the act of purchasing them was always through the process of was always part of the process. Looking back, a lot of those memories are inseparable from the acts of buying those items. And it also reminds us how deeply rooted capitalism is within our society and our innocent memories as well. Similarly, these scenes of overstimulated malls from the childhood memories of the mall or the Walmart aisles showing toys and commercialization of childhood itself. The mall, once a symbol of community and discovery, is now more of just commodification and manufactured joy. And it is through these ghostly drawings of people in these scenes where artificial experiences are constructed by consumer culture. Essentially, we are showing how memory has become commodified itself, packaged and reshaped. By drawing our attention to these layered realities, the work kind of challenges the audience to rethink how they engage with their own memories. The video reveals how capitalism is deeply woven into our memories at a very young age, and how essentially, while these experiences seem genuine and meaningful, they were also brought immediately through these acts of consumption. But the video also shows that these memories are fragile, just as a juxtaposition of a playful moment, an abandoned space, these marks on faces, the scribbles, the X's. It becomes clear that nostalgia is not simply about returning to the past, it's about confronting what has been lost. And in this way, nostalgia is not just sentimental, it's unsettling. And essentially, walking through an abandoned amusement park, it brings us face to face with the absence, decay, and commercialization of what was once there beneath the surface. It becomes clear that no matter how much money you spend, you cannot truly preserve the past. Thank you.
Do you just want to let us know whose work we'll be watching?
Oh, yes, of course, sorry. So we're going to be seeing Maeve's work now.
Sorry, I think it's a clip. Not good.
Something that's like so direct and visible to all the community, of course is gonna pose a threat, and it always has, right? Before there was the internet, there was the lived environment, and and before we had the ability to post on Instagram, and before we had to like fight with Zuckerberg for shadow bans. We had to fight with the police for criminalization. So in the way, it's like back to basics, right? Like to the fundamental, struggle.
People need a call to action. They need to be invited to care about something that's happening across the world, something that's happening near them. And it's hard to send that invite out. So we have to just put it in front of people's faces.
And that is really like their ownership, so-called ownership, their imposition of public property on the land gives them legitimacy. And when people mess with it, it justifies state violence in the form of repression, in the form of police.
Seeing artists leading the charge in activism for Palestine, for Sudan, for the Congo, for like all the injustice here, like the reason that I was thrown into engaging into these causes is because of that ability to connect emotionally. Like expression of emotion or expression of someone's soul that is left on a place, like imprinted onto a specific place. Like it's this idea that is like imprinted into the real physical reality. I don't know, the realness of that.
Oh, it's so pretty.
This is where I think
Okay, so hi everyone. That was an excerpt from my short film called What They Make Seen, and I made it in fall 2024. I made it with some artists and activists about the potential of street art for creating political resistance to repression and in creating liberation movements. I think I have a slideshow. Thank you. Perfect. Yeah, if you can just scroll, that would be great. Okay, so this was the start of my community research project of art making and action called What We Make Seen If Not For Long, street art for political resistance in Jajagi and beyond. It becomes a living archive and a community that celebrates street art making here and elsewhere. And also historically, it builds on histories of marginalized communities using ephemeral media for protest and social change. Next slide, please. So in his essay, Urgent Craft, Radical Publishing During Crisis, Paul Soulelis writes, "Publishing is less about the objects you make and more about the actions you take. Your publics form around these actions through the dispersion of material." Soulelis uses examples of radical publishing historically and recently, and theorizes on the act of publishing as an act that creates a public archive, discourse, and disruption, with the potential to change public consciousness and develop new publics around messaging. That was a lot of public. Next slide, please. So in November 2024, I exhibited this film and my research process in a sort of participatory space as a part of the Intermedia 3 class. Visitors added to a message board in the space that asked, "What does the street need to hear from you?" And helped to build a public archive while reflecting and learning collectively. Next slide, please. One back, thank you. So these are photos of street art that I've seen in just the past few weeks in the city. Now they may be torn down. Previous slide, please. Thank you. Now they may be torn down, added onto, or covered up. We have a decorated bathroom stall, a banner tied to a railing, a poster taped to a statue, and a commemoration to a man who was recently murdered by the SPVM. Imagine how lifeless cities would be without this type of guerrilla street art. What is considered vandalism by many is really a critical and creative public conversation. The City of Montreal and institutions such as Concordia pride themselves in being for the arts, but often criminalize art forms when they are too political. But everything is political, as we know. And then I just wanted to share a more recent example, if you can go to the next slide. So why is street art, radical street art, so urgent? This is an example from just a week ago in New York City. It's a campaign that activists put on to share stories of people who have been recently abducted by ICE, such as the well-known case of Mahmoud Khalil, asking who has the right to have rights. In the face of the growing threat of fascism under Trump and beyond, and in a rising surveillance state, how else can these terrifying truths be shared to generate outrage and action? So in my project, I'm learning that we resist for, with, and because of street art. Thank you very much. You can scan here to watch the film, and you can connect and collaborate with me at maybeso on Instagram. Thanks so much.
And finally, we have Mackenzie's work.
We're just going to need 1 minute.
Great. I don't know, could we get started on the discussion in the 1 minute, or maybe that's too short? We should see your work first. I think just 12:15, so not very long.
Okay, here we are. This video has no sound.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mackenzie, and as previously introduced, I'm a third-year Comms and Cultural Studies student. So that being said, I have very little production experience, and so the formatting was a little bit different, but I did think that providing a visual example of, or coming up with a creative project would be a good challenge for myself. And so I'll give you a rundown of how and why this project came to be. And I should have the video looped while I'm talking, so you guys can kind of get a little bit of a second look. But yeah, so today I bring to you a collection of junk journals as an exploration of archiving and the cataloging of personal histories through the collection of everyday ephemera. So I decided to do this through the scanning of various pages from my personal collection and putting them in a short video format to kind of visualize the entries through another lens. For those unfamiliar with the process of junk journaling, it kind of happens in two stages interchangeably when simplifying it. Everyone goes about it very differently, but for the most part, it starts with the collection of everyday things. And so this is also known as ephemera. And so ephemera in this case consists of items that are either discarded or only used for a very short period of time. And so an example of this, as you may have seen, or actually can see, this could consist of a receipt or receipts from stores that you've been to, menus, napkins, coasters. I have plane tickets. I unfortunately have parking tickets in there as well. But yeah, it can be a little bit of anything and everything. It really just depends on how creative you want to get with it. And so the second stage of this practice then consists of bringing these items together. And similarly to scrapbooking, the attempt remains to make a cohesive page or sequence of pages of the items you've collected. So it can be aesthetically pleasing, it can not be aesthetically pleasing at all. It really is up to the creator at the end of the day. And there is a lot of autonomy and creative freedom in this practice, which is something that I really appreciate and think is unique. And so in my experience, you can see that it happens mostly through collaging, but it often becomes a mixed media practice as well in combining the collaging with writing, painting, drawing. I also really love to take pages from old books and old magazines that I've thrifted. I think that in and of itself is also a really interesting interaction with older media. And so what's being shown is a collection from around spring 2020. So I kind of started getting really consistent with it during COVID, which speaks for itself. Had a lot more time on my hands, as everyone else did. And so, it led to a time frame from, I did do it a little bit beforehand as well, but just not as consistently, which plays its own role through the archival lens, but I did decide to focus on this time period in particular. And so that being said, my two sources of inspiration for this project were mainly just the natural inclination to look back on these journals and see what I could find in them, but it also brought forward the question of what actually is found in the personal and the archiving of personal histories in the everyday. And a second source of inspiration for this was a women's studies class that I took here at the Simone de Beauvoir Institute as an elective. That was a course based on, the whole course revolved around archiving of the institution. And so we conducted interviews in this case and really looked at the personal experiences of those involved with the institute since its existence. And this really gave me an opportunity to value the personal experience and personal histories and memories in an academic context. That was something that I'm not very used to. I don't think that it's brought forward in traditional education for the most part. And so that being said, we got an opportunity to look at the archives of the Institute, and I noticed how much documentation wasn't actually included, that being like flyers for events or notes from important meetings, how decisions were being made and so on. And this isn't uncommon in the university institution as a whole. So that kind of acted as another source of inspiration for me. So this project acted mainly as kind of a first step into something bigger. The cultural studies student in me would love to expand upon it in more of a research inclined kind of context. I don't often have the opportunity in my cultural studies classes to do we have the opportunity, I just don't act on it, to do something creative, and so this was my chance to do so. And so I think that this was the first step in providing evidence for further conversation and contemplation around the practice of junk journaling and how it kind of acts as a combination of scrapbooking and diary rating. It has unique mixed media characteristics, and I think it provides an ulterior means of visualizing the individual and what we might be writing about. And there's something to be said about the inclusion of creativity in these contexts and how they can reflect on thoughts and emotions that are otherwise indescribable with words. And finally, I think that interacting with the scanner in this case to digitalize the work, there's a rather methodical nature that came about. And in flipping through the journals, deciding which pages to include, which not to, created this relationship where I was really interacting with everyday circumstances that I decided to make material. And I think that despite certain gaps, there are really interesting perspectives provided, especially in examples such as spending habits, the reflections on personal relationships. I have one of my journals in there, actually, I used as a junk journal, but also as my notebook for all of my classes. So I have course notes in there, I have to-do lists. It's a little bit of anything and everything. And so there's a lot to be noticed about the social, economic, and political contexts while these entries were created, and overall what can be deduced in looking at them as a collective. So, yeah.
So thank you so much, Mackenzie and everyone. It's such a joy to see your work and hear you expand on it. I do have quite a few questions for you, but I want to prioritize questions for the audience, from the audience, and give you all a chance to ask questions. I see there's already a hand up over here. We have a mic for you. If you can just wait so the people online can hear you as well.
I'll bring a mic right over.
My question concerns access to memory, and I'm questioning the people that have an oral tradition rather than a written tradition. It seems that a lot of the work focuses on the written tradition, but my experience has been from working on environmental issues that the people that have an oral tradition have a better connection to the environment. Clear enough? I mean,
would anyone like to chime in?
Thank you for your question. I think in terms of my own project, I would tend to agree that the moments in which I felt like I had the best access to the memories that I was trying to obtain or get access to were the conversations. So even though I was working with images, the conversations around the images were really the ones that sort of brought so much more to them. The context, the people, the place, like you lose so much when you're just looking at a picture, but when you can speak to somebody about it, or even without a picture, talk about a picture that you can't see, but with someone, I think that's when you really get access to a whole other level of memory.
Would anyone else like to speak to that question? Okay, let's move to another question. And I'll jump in.
Yep, there's one here.
There's a couple.
I am Ray, PhD student at Concordia. I come from India. Since the title is on archives and tangible media, someone also pinpointed about the oral tradition. I would like to bring to your attention, back home in India, the indigenous people, we call them Adivasis or Mulvasis. They also pass on their history, lived experiences on the walls of their houses. I also came across on I think African tribes also have that. So could you be also included in the context of your interaction? Just I wanted to bring to your attention. Because when one of your panelists presented on the street art, so just I wanted to bring to your attention. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have another question over here in the audience.
There's another question.
Yeah, thank you all so much for your presentations. My question is for Mackenzie specifically. I guess I was particularly interested as like doing a video essay course this semester. We talked a lot about a database approach versus more archival approaches, where you're kind of picking and choosing a collection as opposed to just creating a database of everything. And I was kind of taken by what you said about how you kind of picked and chose what pages to include. And I guess I was interested in sort of the choices that you made, like a bit of development on that, but also sort of how the choosing process maybe like changed this project as you're kind of like, you have your journal that's for you, and then you've created this other project that's maybe more public and visible. And the two different like iterations and mediums that are kind of being combined and obviously look slightly different, the junk journal itself and this video that you've created.
Thank you for that question. I really like it because that the question of like what gets included and what doesn't, especially with something that's so personal like a journal, was, I mean, for in some cases was a little bit of a no-brainer. Like there are some obviously like pages that are specifically for me and not really to be shared, and so that in that context makes it a little bit difficult. It creates a little bit of a barrier, especially going from, like you said, like the tangible handheld journal to a video format in this case. But in all honesty, a lot of the pages that I chose were because they were either the ones that I was the most proud of and happy to share, or I felt like they showed the variety, the possibility for variety in the practice that is junk journaling. And so I kind of wanted to provide like an overview of like all the possibilities that could be found in this practice. And I definitely do think that there are limits though in presenting it, because it is such a personal thing. And I also, in doing this, I wondered to myself, you know, would I be able to just hand it over to someone and let them look through it without me intervening? And I think but that in and of itself is something to think about, and how the personal really does play a role in reflecting the larger context at hand, I guess. I'm not sure if that fully answers the question, but I do appreciate it. I think it played a big part in the process overall.
I just wanted to mention also, for those of you joining us on Zoom, if you have any questions, you can put them into the chat. We could read them out. If you wanted to, you could raise your digital hand and you could ask your question with your mic on. And as well, we are keeping an eye on YouTube, so if you have a question there, you can put it in that chat. We can read it out. But there's a question in the space, which is great.
Hi, thanks again for letting me ask another question. Maeve, this question is kind of for you, although anybody on the panel could speak to this. It's about the idea of ephemerality, and I think all of you touch upon this in different ways. But Maeve, I think at one point you talked about ephemeral media, like street art as ephemeral media. And I was like, yeah, she's totally right. But then I started thinking about it, and you know, some of the problems that people might quote around street art is that, well, it lingers. You know, it's like it's spray paint, it's like paste and glue and this kind of stuff. So there's a materiality still that maybe contradicts the idea of ephemerality. And then I thought about the anonymity maybe of the street art as being potentially connected to ephemerality. So more than anything, I would just love to hear you talk about the idea of street art as ephemeral media.
Thank you. I love talking about this. I think that street art is a bit of, like you said, a bit of a mix. It creates kind of like this conversation where if it's criminalized, it can be totally erased. If it's disagreed with, it can be scratched out, it can be added on to. I think it's really beautiful how, maybe not so beautiful if it gets completely erased, but otherwise, I think it's really beautiful how it can become this public, what's the word for it? This public forum, for conversation, but also in my focus, like for social change, for political resistance, and for creating liberation movements. I think that I was also focused on like the media that is being attached to the wall, or is being used to create the street art, kind of as like an ephemeral thing. So if it's like a spray paint can, it's being tossed out. If it's a poster, it's not going to stay for long. It's not staying with you, is kind of like the ephemera of it as well. And then, like you said, the anonymity of it is you don't really know who is creating it. The common example is Banksy, but there's like so many other well-known street artists. But then there's also just like people who go out and put a sticker on the metro, you know? It's really accessible to any level. So I'm not sure if that answers your question at all, but thank you so much.
All right. Oh yeah, does anyone else want to speak to ideas of ephemerality and permanence? Well, I'm going to jump in with a question. I think when doing archival research, I'm always interested to know what were some of the hopes and fantasies of what you would find going into this archival research and documentation process and interview process. What did you imagine you would uncover in terms of stories and images? And then what were some of the major silences or gaps that you encountered in your research?
For me, when I first started the project, it was almost like revisiting the past, because especially when it came to the old commercial, that was like a toy I actually wanted when I was a kid. And seeing that commercial again, it's a toy I still wanted. And I guess in a way it became like, kind of like me trying to get back to the past, because it's so familiar. And in a way, this project was just me trying, like, getting back to the past. And it was through that, like, marketing course I took that I realized I was really sold this idea that my past could be kept, or my past could stay with, like, all these cameras and footage and all these things. But in reality, and I think Thea said this, it can all be lost. So in a way, like, that's kind of like the what I was trying to find, and then the realization I got through, like, going through all these archival, like, footages and objects.
On my end, I have always felt a really big disconnect, I think, from larger contexts and larger infrastructure. And I've always personally struggled to find, like, direct connections, I guess, to these massive infrastructural things that I know that I experience on a daily basis. But it was kind of pinpointing how and where I experienced and felt those things. And so for me, through my process, the collection of these little everyday moments provided that tangible example of how and why these everyday moments then collectively reflect a much larger context. And I think so, I think at the end of the day, that is kind of what I intended going into it, or what I wanted to find. And I would say that I did find that, but there were definitely gaps, especially if I did stop writing for a little bit, or I did stop the practice for a little bit. In looking back, there are definitely actual temporal gaps where I wasn't as active in the practice, but then also you can't include everything as much as you'd like to. So that's my answer.
Thank you.
I just wrote down a quick note, and I said, like, I just see, like, a common tie between, it might be like collecting, unsettling, rearranging, and sharing of memory. And then also, like, this idea of fusing the digital and the physical in the hopes of doing so. So that was just a quick thought.
Beautiful. Yeah, do you want to jump in?
Sure. I was gonna say, going into the archive, to be completely honest, I was just looking for material. Like, I'd been working on this film for so long, and I had so much audio, and I had all these videos that I had taken, and there was just such a disconnect of, like, how am I gonna connect these things that this person is telling me, and then my own video, I just, like, wasn't able to make it work. And I called my grandmother, and I drove to Ottawa, and I was like, can you give me something visual that I can look at and connect to these things that I'm thinking about and that we're talking about together? And I mentioned it earlier, like, it was the tangibility. It was like, oh, okay, now I get it. Now I know what you're talking about. Now I know that you've been going back and forth and carrying these images with you in the same way as I'm carrying my phone images with me. I think, like, sometimes you can go into an archive just to find a picture too, maybe not a deeper meaning, but it can pop out as well when you're looking for it.
So were these photos that she had in her personal archive and didn't think to share with you before, or you hadn't thought to ask her for these photos previously?
I'd asked her for, I was so focused on video. I was, like, making a film, and I was like, oh, I need video. So I asked her if she had any video, and obviously she didn't, because people didn't take as much video back then. So when I got the pictures, that's when I started collaging them and working with them, and things started to make more sense.
Interesting. Okay, 1 minute left. Do we have?
There was
I think there's one more
here.
question.
Yeah, one more question. Last question. Here we go.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for the presentations. I do have a question for the first panelist, Thea, regarding this idea about like home. The question was asked, do you consider Norway your home? And I think the response was no, but this is the reality. And then it goes on discussing about like the family that's built. What would you say is the distinction really between what one considers home and the house they've built? You know, if there's a distinction between that, you know, also with your own experience of visiting Norway, getting in touch with those roots, coming back, and you know, you talk about sort of adjusting there and then having to readjust, you know, between those trips. So yeah, I was just wondering what your thoughts were.
Yeah, thanks. That was definitely a challenge of the project, was trying to figure that out. Because in a way, like, I want to call Norway home. I love it there. I love being there. I have my people there. But I'm not ready. I don't think it's my home. I think Canada is my home, which is fine. I can belong in Norway and I can belong in Canada. But I was born here and my family's here, and that's a big part of it. In the same way as my grandmother was born in Norway, and she said it, almost everybody's in Canada, but her heart is always going to be there. So I do think that like it is individual. Sometimes people don't want to call a place home and they choose not to, and that's fine, and they'll build a new home wherever they choose. But there is something to be said about growing up somewhere. I think it's foundational for sure.
Well, I think that's a perfect note to end on, because all of your pieces bring up such interesting questions about the relationship between archives and place as well, whether it's the place of the home, the place of the street, the obsolete shopping malls and play parks, and the home. So I really encourage you to ask the artists more questions, and I think all their films will be screened later, if I understand correctly. And let's finish with a big round of applause for everyone. Thank you so much.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Concordia University's Fourth Space. Thank you for joining us for the second half of today's Concordia Undergraduate Academic Conference of Communication Studies. And this part, the first panel this afternoon is Wikipedia page creation. Just for people joining us who weren't here this morning, we are streaming to YouTube live from Fourth Space, and we are also located here on unceded Indigenous lands. We're also running today's event as a live stream Zoom meeting. So those of you joining us back in the Zoom, comments and questions are fantastic. Please pop those into the chat. We can read them out. Those of you here in the space, you probably know. If you have any questions, we'll bring a microphone over to you. Okay, it's my pleasure to pass it over to the panel, and we can get started. Over to you.
Yes, hello? Is it?
You're up.
Turn me on? Okay. So I'm really honored to moderate this panel and present our three panelists, Adèle, Samantha, and Oshra. Just a brief context for this panel and the work that you'll be seeing. It came out of my class, a media and gender class, that I've had for a couple of years, turned into an official Wikipedia course. I was a Wikipedia scholar in 2018, and I've been involved in art and feminism, which is also a Wikipedia initiative, particularly as a response to the very, very few women, trans, and non-binary editors, as well as very few biographies. So in 2014, just to give, approximately 10 to 15% of editor community were women, trans, or non-binary people, and 15% of biography entries were. 15% out of all the biography entries on Wikipedia. In 2020, so 6 years later, 18% only. So so I took on this challenge because I wanted to fill this Wikipedia gap on all kinds of things, all kinds of entries in my class. So I was really honored that these students really took up the challenge and really incorporated more women and kind of centric feminist content, taking up new articles and also revising other articles. And I guess you're going to talk about it. So one, I know Adèle is going to be talking about Claudia Bouvet. So was really a kind of response to the lack of Quebecois culture, but Quebecois women on Wikipedia. Sam, you took on rewriting and an entry on femicide in pregnancy, and Oshra created a new page also about a really important woman from one of the founders of a book that you may be familiar with, Our Bodies Ourselves. And I'm really excited to hear your reflections on it and so on. So also we can recognize that Wikipedia perhaps is a reliable source, no matter what people say, and I'm really welcome kind of students rethinking of Wikipedia as well.
Thank you, Magda. So my name is Adèle Décary-Chen. I'm a third-year undergrad student at Concordia. I'm doing my major in communications and cultural studies and my minor in sociology. And so I'll be presenting my Wikipedia page about Claudia Bouvette, who is a singer-songwriter from Quebec. But before I jump into that, I kind of wanted to talk about why writing this Wikipedia page was important for me. So when I started my degree, I did a first internship in TV research. So I was working as a researcher for La Belle Tournée, which is a variety show on Télé-Québec and TVA. And La Belle Tournée, the concept is every episode is like a musical concert, a show that takes place in a different region of the province. And so as a researcher, our goal was to find musical artists in each of these regions. So artists that have to do with Mauricie and artists that have to do with Laval and places like that. And what I found particularly difficult is finding this type of information about Quebecois artists and especially Quebecois women, right? So just this, I realized that there was like a lacking, there was a lack of this like centralized information, right? Somewhere where you can find all this information about where somebody comes from, where they studied, where all these places. And so when this Wikipedia project came in Magda's class, I thought it was particularly interesting to write not only about a Quebecois artist, but also a woman, because as Magda said, there's huge content gaps concerning women artists, and often like considering that their work is often considered less legitimate, which I'll jump into a bit later. And so, who's Claudia Bouvette? She's an artist that I particularly enjoy. She's been in the Quebec cultural landscape since 2010 when she participated in a TV reality show called Mixmania, which is a show of song and dance. And ever since, she's been pursuing the music business, and so she's released a few albums. She's participated in many TV shows, and so she appears as a notable subject in the Quebec cultural industry. Not only that, but she's been the subject of various features in La Presse, Journal de Montréal, Le Devoir. She was on the cover of El Québec, so she was a notable figure, and she also intersected, interestingly enough, with the themes of the course of media and gender. And so in her work and her songs, she often kind of, in a song like Douchebag, she often talks about the reappropriation of women in pop and how often women in pop are considered like products of the industry. She kind of counters this perspective and kind of deals with themes of reappropriation of the body through sensuality and things like that. And so I created this page basically starting with creating an outline of different sections. And so I sectioned kind of parts of her life through major career projects. So albums or like TV participation. I also wrote a small section about her musical style and artistry, and then I did a full-on discography and filmography of all her different musical projects, as well as her TV and cinema participation. And so I started really by taking these like major feature articles that she had been talked about, and then I kind of wrote from that, and then I went to get a lot of secondary sources to kind of build this page. And then I think what was important for me, especially like coming from my experience of using Wikipedia as a research tool, is not only that the information has to be made available on Wikipedia, but it also has to be discoverable. And so one of the major aspects of my Wikipedia page was like also doing many things to make the page visible. So for example, I went through all the other pages that mentioned Claudia Bouvette's name, and then I linked back to my article. Or I went through many, there's a lot of articles on Wikipedia that are lists, like list of people from Brussels, list of people from Quebec, and I went through multiple of these relevant lists, added my article to them. And then lastly, I also went through like similar pages, so like female singer-songwriters from Quebec, and looked at the categories that their page had been put in, and then I went to put the same categories in my page. And yeah, I also wanted to touch up on an issue that I faced, which relates back to Magda's course a lot, but a few days after my page had been put online, some user flagged it as being maybe not respecting Wikipedia's notability guidelines. So this can be as much in like your subject is not a notable person, or your article does not refer to notable like sources, which was not exact, because as I've discussed, she's kind of a notable subject, and the articles that I chose were like La Presse and Radio-Canada and Le Devoir, so all these like credible sources in the Quebec media landscape. And so I think this kind of, just the fact that somebody flagged this page as being not relevant kind of highlights maybe these reflections on what kind of content is considered valuable and credible on Wikipedia or like mainstream information platforms. But I'd like also to highlight that WikiEdu, the platform, was really helpful in dealing with this issue super quickly. So once I flagged the issue, somebody from WikiEd really like went through quickly, removed the notability like alert, and added my page to many projects to make it more credible. And so if we can just do a little overview of the page quickly. So this is the page, and I think basically my conclusions about this project is that generally just creating this article helped address content gaps concerning women artists and Quebec artists, but also I think it really highlights the importance and the role of Wikipedia in the creation of communal knowledge, right? It's a centralized platforms where users can collaborate and create just like a bank of information, which is really important in Quebec's cultural context, which is very strong, very rich, but also very independent and secluded from like maybe the rest of like the Canadian cultural infrastructure. And so Wikipedia kind of participates in the maintenance of Quebec's cultural system by being a platform where people can create knowledge and document local artists. But also I think Wikipedia can come to participate in the expansion and the development of Quebec's cultural system, because as my personal experience goes to show, right, as a TV researcher, if the information's just not available and not discoverable, then it just can't be featured, right? If I can't know that Claudia Bouvet is from Brossard, then I can't feature her on my TV show about Brossard. So my TV show suffers from not featuring the best content. Claudia Bouvet suffers from not having the most visibility, and even Brossard suffers from not, right, being like having the, I don't know, the credit for having Claudia Bouvet or something. So I think Wikipedia emerges really as like this interesting communal digital platform. And I'd also like to finish by highlighting how I think that this project was particularly interesting in the Communication and Cultural Studies program. I think that as a cultural studies student, we kind of maybe lack sometimes these practical projects that really allow us to apply our knowledge and our competencies to real world situations, right? It's like a very essay-based program, which is absolutely great. But also I think that this Wikipedia project goes to show how, you know, us communication students that don't really have like video or sound production can also use our research skills and our knowledge of media conventions and our critical thinking to create content which is for a broader audience and purpose. So thank you.
Hi, my name is Samantha de Luca Barata. I'm a second-year undergraduate student in communication studies. And I'm going to be discussing the research and creation process of my Wikipedia page on pregnancy-associated femicide. However, I'm going to specifically be highlighting what this process taught me about gender gaps in knowledge production and the way these gender gaps have real-life effects on women. So So before continuing, I first want to define pregnancy-associated femicide. So pregnancy-associated femicide is a form of gender-based violence involving the murder of a woman during the period of pregnancy and up to 1 year after childbirth. So there actually already was an existing Wikipedia page on this topic that was titled "The Murder of Pregnant Women." I have since renamed it, which I will get to later. But this page was extremely outdated, very lacking. There was no reference dating past 2011. So I thought that maybe it would be a good idea to update this page. What really solidified my decision to focus my research on this topic, however, was while conducting preliminary research, I came across an incredibly jarring and deeply concerning fact that really marked me and really encouraged me to pursue this as my topic of research. And that is that in the United States today, the leading cause of death for pregnant and postpartum women is femicide. So women are more likely to be murdered during the period of pregnancy and the postpartum period than to die from the 3 principal obstetric causes of maternal death, which are hemorrhage, sepsis, and high blood pressure disorders. And a recent study released in January of 2025 actually confirmed that women are also more likely to be murdered during the pregnancy and postpartum period than to die from the leading cause of death in the United States, which is cardiovascular diseases. So upon finding this fact, I felt that considering Wikipedia is one of the most frequently visited informational resources online, I felt that the information on the page should reflect the urgency of the issue. So I decided to take on this project and rewrite the page. So my page has 4 different sections, and while it does provide a global overview of the subject, most of the research does center the United States. However, I was still able to provide kind of more of a global perspective where information was available. So there's a section on statistics in the United States and then globally, a section on laws and policies, intervention methods related to pregnancy-associated femicide, and then notable cases of pregnancy-associated femicide. I would like to highlight a few key facts before getting a little bit more into the creation process. So globally, pregnancy increases the likelihood of femicide. Intimate partner violence precedes the majority of pregnancy-associated femicides, with male intimate partners being the primary perpetrators. Regarding the United States, in a time when women's reproductive rights are being threatened, I specifically wanted to highlight these 3 facts. So in the United States, 1 in 6 female victims of intimate partner violence are first abused during pregnancy. The risk of being a victim of femicide triples for women experiencing intimate partner violence during pregnancy. And abuse during a previous pregnancy is cited by 27.3% of women as an influencing factor in their decision to get an abortion. So the process of this, as I said, there was already an existing Wikipedia page, but because the information was severely updated, I updated and expanded upon the existing article. However, I basically had to slash the whole article and start from scratch because, like I said, the research was over 10 years old. So then after publishing my edits, because they were quite substantial, I wanted to explain on the talk page of my Wikipedia page why I made these edits, where my research came from, etc. So in case you don't know what a talk page is, it's a section on each Wikipedia article that's basically a public forum for Wikipedia users to discuss, debate, suggest edits, explain their edits as I did, present new research. So I published my edits, and then I basically wrote a very long paragraph explaining why I made these edits. Next, I submitted a move request. So what a move request is when you propose a title change for the article, meaning that if approved, the page would be moved from the previous title it was listed under the new title that you suggested. So I submitted my move request on the talk page, and then after about a week and a half of discussion between myself and other Wikipedia users, the title change was approved, and the page was officially renamed Pregnancy-Associated Femicide. So as you can see there, it says at the top, redirected from murder of pregnant women, and that's the official title. The reason that I felt it was really important to change the title was because throughout my research, the importance of designating this type of crime as gender-based was repeatedly emphasized, because in order to properly address pregnancy-associated femicide, recognizing the gendered component of it is crucial. So I felt that the title of the page should reflect that reality. So the main thing that this research and the research and creation process of this page illuminated for me is that knowledge production is gendered. And what I mean by that is that the topics of research in academia that are given specific time and attention, funding, and resources reflect wider gender biases. And this is definitely true of pregnancy-associated femicide. Even considering the fact that in the past 10 years, there has been a lot of new research on the subject, still research is limited and lacking. And the reason for that is because frequently the information on pregnancy-associated femicide is simply not available. The reason for that is, there's a few reasons, but I want to highlight a few. In the US, maternal mortality reviews do not include homicide as a cause of maternal death. Death records in cases of homicide are not required to include a victim-perpetrator relationship or a history of abuse. And in certain states, death records do not even require a pregnancy checkbox. So if the information is not available, researchers are not able to assess the full scope of the issue, which is, of course, especially problematic when we consider the fact that the leading cause of death for pregnant women in the US is femicide. Furthermore, these gender gaps in research are reflected in similarly lacking laws and policies in the US. So while 38 American states do have laws with harsher penalties if a woman is murdered while pregnant, because in those cases the fetus would be considered a legal crime victim, there is no specific policy addressing the victim of femicide herself. And the legal code does not even have a definition of femicide at all. So basically what this kind of taught me, this whole process, is that gender gaps in knowledge production are reflected in laws and policies, and in the case of pregnancy-associated femicide, this is quite literally a threat on women's lives. So in terms of the publication of my page, something else I learned is that knowledge being gendered in terms of the research available on this subject was similarly reflected on the ways that people interacted with my research after it was published. So something we had discussed in class is the fact that women's articles tend to be subject to higher levels of scrutiny and criticism, and this was certainly true of my page. There was one male Wikipedia user that stated that though he really liked the article, he was even part of the group of Wikipedia users that approved the title change. He expected the article to be biased before reading it. I'm actually currently in an ongoing conversation with another Wikipedia user who stated that my article is misleading. He is trying to argue that I am misinterpreting the data, that I'm not able to understand my own research. And we've been going back and forth for about a month, and still he is not conceding. He's citing 20-year-old sources. It is what it is, but yeah, it was interesting to see that the way that knowledge is interacted with in public forum is also affected by the misogyny that affects the research itself. I have to wrap up it? Okay. So just a quick final reflection. Through my research, I really wanted to highlight the ways in which gender gaps in knowledge production translate to a lack of laws and policies addressing women's issues, and how in the case of pregnancy-associated femicide, this results in inadequate protection for potential future victims of this form of violence. But another thing that I learned throughout this process is that platforms like Wikipedia are a powerful tool in countering these gender gaps through the democratization of knowledge production. And so I hope that, by my small contribution to Wikipedia, that I could have, hopefully been a part of that change, which I hope will translate, will spread out further into kind of recognizing the severity of this issue, and funding more research, spending more time and attention on figuring out how do we deal with this in academia, in legislation, as a society. So yeah, that's it for me. I will pass it over to you. Sorry, I know I went over time a bit.
Hello, my name is Oshra Levy-Beck, and I'm going to be talking to you about the legacy of Farinha-Amorim, who is one of the co-authors and founders of Our Bodies Ourselves, which was formerly known as the Boston Women's Health Collective. Our Bodies Ourselves is now the name of the organization. It is also the name of the book that they are famous for. It's one of the, it is now known as the Women's Health Bible. It is one of the first women's health publications that came out of second wave feminism in the 70s. And this was a huge deal, especially in the United States. This was among the same time, or this was going on right after the civil rights movement, and as a lot of changes were happening when it came to women's rights. So first of all, so who is Farinha-Amorim? I'm not going to read you my entire Wikipedia page, but basically, Farinha-Amorim is a Holocaust survivor. She was born in Poland in 1942. And she was also a World War II refugee. That part of Poland that she was born in is called, it was called Lvov. It is now called Lviv. It is part of Ukraine now. And she was a refugee in the United States, first in California, and then later on in life, she moved to Boston. But during her time in university at UCLA, she became an activist. She became involved in the civil rights movement and the feminist movement as well. After her time in university, she traveled a lot to promote women's health, mainly in Latin America, countries like Mexico and Colombia, and also very especially in India. She now lives in Boston with her daughter Leah and spends parts of the year in Mexico. I have kind of a connection to Farinha herself. I'm friends with one of her granddaughters, and that was kind of what motivated me to write this page about her, because she's a very important figure, and I noticed that some of the other authors of Our Bodies Ourselves did have their own Wikipedia pages, but Farinha did not. And yeah. So I wanted to kind of to keep going on that. My motivations for writing about Farinha very much came from my own interest and passion in like feminism and bringing light to marginalized voices, also filling the gaps in feminist history, or herstory, if you want to call it that. And because there's a lot of just like missing pieces that, and I think that Wikipedia being such a widely used resource, it's really important to have that information be really accessible to anyone who may stumble upon it, right? yeah, also to learn more about the roles and the contributions of Jewish women in feminism and their like roles in bringing more rights to women, especially in North America. So a lot of my research, it was really difficult to find documents about Volhynia. I found a personal memoir published on Jewish Currents where she recounted what she knew and what she remembered of her life and how she got to the United States, and also her relationship to Judaism and how that relates to her relationship to activism. There were also some podcast interviews where she talked about Our Bodies, Ourselves, as well as a chapter in Jewish radical feminism. That the name of the chapter is called Our Bodies and Our Jewish Selves, and it discusses the Jewish influence on the publication. I also had to do some digging to find her birth name and her actual date of birth, and so that involved going into databases on Holocaust victims and survivors. Yeah, I also had the privilege of running my information and my research by Volhynia herself. I got to have a Zoom call with her, which was such an honor. So there definitely were some limitations in the Wikipedia process. The tone is very limiting when it comes to talking about a person, and it doesn't leave a lot of room for nuance when it comes to personal narratives. Also, only being able to use secondary sources on Wikipedia is very limiting and doesn't allow for the filling of a lot of gaps that I could have filled were I able to just quote Volhynia herself, right? So this is Volhynia in Mexico on a family vacation. During the Zoom call that I had with her, I learned that a lot of the information I found online was not entirely accurate, and that Volhynia has been working with an organization that helps Holocaust survivors find those concrete details about their lives and about their families, and that since then she has learned a lot of new information about her own story. But I wasn't able to correct it on Wikipedia because of the limitation to secondary sources. But yeah, this is just some of the information that I would like to correct, but that I've not been able to. And something that kind of taught me about Wikipedia, well, okay, first of all, I did have to include an acknowledgement that the sources that I found and used for this assignment recounted information that came from an adult woman who was piecing together her childhood through memories and stories that she was told. While Wikipedia does not have space for this nuance, it is important to note that war, displacement, and trauma play a significant role in the accuracy of Volhynia's story. I also think that it's important to add that something that this really taught me about Wikipedia is that while it isn't a really important resource because of how accessible it is, and I think that it did definitely break down the myth that Wikipedia is completely unreliable for me, this process also really showed me how the ways that misinformation or lack of gaps in information can be manufactured and disseminated even when it's not intentional. And the ways that even despite having multiple sources, secondary sources on Volhynia and her life and her story, I found out later from her that a lot of that was not entirely accurate. And sometimes that's just how it happens. There have been some new developments. Don't worry, I'm almost done. There have been some new developments, though. I created this page from scratch and did not have any, there was no conversations in the talk page. I have not had anyone edit it as far as I know. But there has been a new article about Volhynia's story that was published in the Boston Globe. And they interviewed her and discussed many of the details from the previous writings that may have been incorrect, inaccurate, or lacking nuance. And This is from like the new information that Volumnia herself has learned from working with the organization that is helping Holocaust survivors find information about their lives and their families. So I look forward to updating the Wikipedia page with this article. Yeah, that's the summary is that, yeah, despite feeling limited by Wikipedia's format, I really enjoyed learning about Volumnia. I think her contributions to the women's health movement is a really important part of the history of feminism, and I found her path to activism very inspiring. I'm very happy to have put that information out there.
Are we switching into Q&A from the audience? Is that what's occurring?
I have a question, but
please ask.
If somebody has a question from the audience right away.
We're going to get a microphone to you. And just a reminder to those on Zoom, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat and we'll be sure to read them out.
I'll bring a mic over. Hold on.
The study on femicide, is there a reason that you didn't access or try to do Canadian sources?
I did. It's just, unfortunately, there was little to no research on Canada. Most of the research was from the United States. There was a lot of research from Latin America, specifically Argentina, but I actually was unable to find any sources directly speaking about Canada.
So in Canada, who would be responsible for producing this type of research? Because it seems to be a very racialized decision. One of my experiences is that one of the ways not to develop public policy is just not to be sure that there's no basic information and research available. And I'm not surprised, but I'm just wondering, in Canada, is there a way that that could be remedied, or somebody could start to look at that? Because the government spends so much money on, anyway.
I do definitely think it's a question of funding, for one. A lot of these sources came from, like for my research, came from medical journals or law reviews. So I think in Canada, it would have to be kind of, it would be a similar issue. It's just about which research is given time and attention, what is the funding like, who is even paying attention to this issue? Because if nobody has their eyes on this, nobody's gonna think to look further into it. Interestingly enough, in a lot of the global reviews I read, they mentioned one specific study from the United States released in 2022 that also discussed how COVID increased the likelihood of pregnancy, the rate of incidence of pregnancy-associated femicide. So I think it's also about kind of, starting that, I don't know if domino effect is the word, but because research started emerging from the US, it kind of caused people to look to other countries and see what the state was there. So I'm hoping that as research keeps emerging on the subject, because like I had mentioned, there's a study that came out at the end of January 2025, once again talking about the United States. But I'm hoping that, now that people are looking into this, other countries will kind of follow suit, because that's what seemed to happen with the United States and with the studies on Argentina, because like I said, a lot of those studies kept referencing this one specific study. So.
Interested in hearing about your work, and she would be in a position, not her herself, but she would be in a position to start looking into some of these issues. I'm afraid it's not going to be a pretty picture, but I think it's better to know. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Do you have a question?
Was there a question online?
There is not a question online currently.
Well, I'd like to say to the audience that all of you can go ahead and make changes on Wikipedia very easily, small ones, that sometimes can be really impactful. So I encourage everyone to do so. But I wanted to ask if you would like to share, since doing this assignment, and I know some of you are following up with your pages and other things. I'm curious if you have any memorable conversations about Wikipedia since you've done this assignment or during working on these pages. I know, Sam, you have. I'm thinking of something particular, but any of you, just because I think there is so much different things to say about Wikipedia. Would you like to share?
Well, I kind of briefly mentioned the conversations I was having on the talk page, but I can elaborate a bit more on that.
Or in person, with people. Sorry, I meant conversations with people in your life.
Sorry. Yes.
About Wikipedia.
Yes. Yeah, well, once I published this page, I did share it with family and friends, and something that stuck out to a lot of people was the relationship between abortion and abuse during pregnancy. And I actually was able to have some really interesting conversations with people that I maybe had different views on reproductive rights. And I think that what was really great to see is that from that conversation, it puts things into a different light. And I think that by kind of making this information available, at least for me and at least for the people that I was speaking to about this, it kind of emphasized the fact that, when we talk about these issues like women's reproductive rights, in the case of this subject, it's a life-saving measure in many cases. So I think that I'm really happy that through this Wikipedia page, it was kind of able to open those conversations with people and hopefully with whoever comes across this page. So yeah, I'm happy that I got the opportunity to share it with people actually in my personal life and kind of open the floor to those conversations and have discussions surrounding that. And, I know it's one Wikipedia page, but maybe somebody else will come across it and see that, and maybe it'll shift their perspective a bit as well, I hope. So.
To answer your question also, I think this project has brought me to have conversations with my family and my dad. My dad is a computer scientist, and so he's been on the internet for a long time, and the beginnings of the internet, he knows Wikipedia, and he tells me all these stories about. He's a big fan of classical music also, and he tells me these stories about his favorite pages on his classical his music composers, right? They would become meme pages, right? People would go on the Wikipedia page, change something to be Bach was a skateboarder, and then see how long it would stay up. And he tells me these stories of Wikipedia used to be this platform where you could go and kind of change stuff and kind of make it less credible. But then really what this project has shown is even if you're writing a page on a subject like mine, which isn't the most controversial, right? If you put in false information or information that isn't credible, it's not going to stick around. There's all this verification system that's super rigorous, and that at the end of the day makes these pages more and more credible, which is as you said, contrary to popular opinion maybe sometimes on Wikipedia and how it used to be. So yeah.
The conversations that I've had, because I also shared my page with family and friends, and of course my mom decided to send it to all of her friends as well, as moms do. And I think that one of the notable things about this is that so many of the reactions I got, because I think most of the people who ended up reading this page that I made were also women. And I think that so many people have heard of Our Bodies, Ourselves, and so many people have heard of this book, or maybe of the organization, or the Boston Women's Health Movement, or they have kind of like a vague idea of what it is, but they don't actually know anything about the authors. They don't know who the authors are, they don't know their names, and they don't know what the specific contributions of these authors are. And so one of the biggest reactions that I got from people who would read this page and then tell me that they read it was, they were like, wow, this is so amazing. I had no idea that, like, because you think about the authors of this like world famous book that has been translated into like 20 languages or something like that, that has been like all around the world and has been, of course, like revised and updated and like changed based on like the context of where it is. But you don't really hear a lot about the individuals who started it. And I think that that was like a big kind of realization for a lot of people who read it, is they were like, oh, I'd like kind of heard of this, but I didn't actually know anything about it. And I think that also something that's really, that kind of brings up for me is this, this idea in like feminist research and like feminist like epistemologies about like really looking into the stories of the people who are like kind of taking firsthand accounts as valid sources of knowledge, right? And being able to not just see the research in a vacuum, but also see the context from which it came from. And I think that that kind of pushes people to look into it more. Yeah.
We did have a question on Zoom, which just came in a little earlier. I can read this out. It's a question from Chris, who says, Chris is homesick and sorry to miss this. You might know who that is. I had a question related to the earlier topic of ephemerality. And this might be a question for Oshra or the whole panel. I was wondering if there are any limits to what counts for evidence on Wikipedia. Are there challenges to making pages that might draw on storytelling or oral cultures, etc.?
Well, yes, definitely there were limitations. Kind of one of my main challenges with creating this page was the fact that I was limited to secondary sources and that there were so few secondary sources about Volumnia herself, or ones that maybe only had like a couple of little tidbits of information but didn't really tell a story, or even I couldn't really use the Our Bodies Ourselves official website because it didn't, like, other than saying kind of where they are now or like giving a general overview of who this person is, the official website didn't really get into the context of what got these authors into this organization and how they created it. And there is like an about page where they do talk about what it came out of, but it's the individual stories that are limited in access. And yeah, again, being limited to secondary sources makes it a lot more difficult to tell like a nuanced account of a person's life.
Just on the subject of secondary sources, something that I found interesting was that on the talk page, like, while I think there's a general consensus of what a secondary source is, certain people seem to disagree on what constitutes like a trustworthy source. So, for example, not to keep bashing on this one man on my talk page, but I cited a study, the recent one that came out in 2025, that corroborated that the leading cause of death for pregnant women in the US is femicide. And he said, well, the article has been peer reviewed, and the article was about this article being presented at a conference. However, it's not been officially released yet. So according to him, this does not constitute a valid secondary source. So even though it is a peer-reviewed article, because it's a source reporting on the presentation of that article at a scientific conference, to him, it doesn't count as a secondary source. So I think there's also some debate, and this didn't just happen on my page. I remember talking to another student in our class that was having a similar issue with people on her talk page saying, this isn't a valid secondary source. So even though, like I said, there's general consensus on what a secondary source is, you'll still have these kind of disagreements amongst Wikipedia users discussing your article about what a valid source and is or is not, sorry. And I don't know, I'm kind of interested in, I don't have the answer, but I'm wondering if, what are the kind of biases amongst within these discussions? Why is, for example, this source that I cited not a valid secondary source, but when this person was citing, an article from 2008, that was, a good enough secondary source to counter my argument. So I think, again, that's kind of just returning for me to the idea of gender biases in knowledge production and the way we discuss knowledge and research. So I don't know, maybe I got a little bit off topic there, but I just wanted to kind of point that out in terms of, what constitutes a valid source.
Yeah, well, Art and Feminism, the organization I mentioned earlier, and what spurred this project, actually talk a lot about this, what you're saying, and the ways in which, because we can talk about Wikipedia being a sort of democratic, it has the pillars of neutrality, but we know we try our best, it's not. And I think Art and Feminism is doing a lot of research around figuring out even a code of ethics and a code of conduct beyond Wikipedia of what's available to the kind of a general public to enter into the space, right? Because I don't know how maybe you three were quite exceptional students in your process, but I think for me and for others, it's very nerve-wracking to enter into that space, right? And especially if you get that comment from an editor, you don't know who they are. They're just this sort of person over there, have this power, right? And and I know that it can be very nerve-wracking, but to recognize that actually you have just as much power in some ways as them for the knowledge production. You are valued, and I think it's really important, I think, to break down the ways in which we have to enter in. And actually, just to say for knowledge is gendered, another statistic from Art and Feminism, from WikiEdu, is 64% of student editors identify as female, trans, or non-binary, and 65% of faculty. But yet we still have only 18%. So if you think about who is actually wanting to contribute and what's on Wikipedia. So you guys got to keep going. And everyone else too. That's my spiel. Get in on Wikipedia editing, get in there. Because I think another thing I wanted to say is for your presentations, we talked about notability and secondary sources, and also figuring out information is we need more information, we need more knowledge on all these subjects, right? Because that's the way that if we have an article, then you find it, you find more, right? And so I think for your case, it's really important, but also I think what Adèle said is the ways in which you were trying to put together this festival. And of course, it's easy to go to Wikipedia and find, if you don't see the source, how else are you gonna find them, right? Maybe through Google. So it's, I think, really important, as you said, is enriching Quebec culture. I think is such a beautiful thing to say, but also because by your use and your interventions into Wikipedia, it can also shift in terms of what's available, how Wikipedia is being used, how it's being edited, and have more editors that maybe aren't so like that guy. So we have.
Yes.
I just wanted to appreciate the insight shared and also the platform. You also gave us the confidence even the audience, anyone also can contribute. So my question, either of you can answer. It is of two sides. From the research student side, after doing this research, how do you feel? Do you encourage the information available in the Wikipedia to be used for research? And the second one is, do you rely on the information provided available in the Wikipedia right now in the present stage? It's from your side, and also do you encourage, because these days they are also encouraging when you use Wikipedia citation, they are also providing the option to use in the citation. How confident do you feel for the research students for scholarly writings to cite them? Thank you.
To answer your question in 2 points, is the information on Wikipedia reliable? I would say enough. To get an overview of a situation, as we've seen, it does rely on some sort of peer reviewing, on some sort of community support, on secondary sources. If you want to get an overview of information, I would say it's very fair information. If you want to use it in scholarly work, perhaps not. Perhaps you can go from the Wikipedia page, go see the sources that they cite, and go from these sources. But for, I would say, an overview of information, it's absolutely a wonderful source.
Yeah, I was gonna say something very similar, which is that Wikipedia is a great place for, if you're looking to use it as a source, it is a great place for general knowledge. It is a great place to kind of get an idea of something. But yeah, I think that because it is such a democratic process, you can trust that in general, the information that you're seeing is for the most part reliable. It is constantly being reviewed. It is constantly having people go over it and edit it and argue with each other about whether or not the information is correct, right? But yeah, when it comes to quoting it or directly using it as a source for scholarly writing, it is definitely the safe, like Adèle said, the safe option is to go and check the sources that Wikipedia uses. Because if you're just trying to get a general idea of something or an overview, and you're I know this thing, but I just need to double check that it's correct, it's kind of Wikipedia is really great as a quick way to do that. But it's not a scholarly resource.
I agree with what they said. I mean, unfortunately, even though I would agree that the information does tend to be accurate, you still can't quote it for a scholarly essay. And I think that is maybe largely due to the idea oh, anyone can edit, which is true. But first of all, something I learned that I didn't know is that there are certain pages that are protected. Not anyone can just edit it. So there is that. And also, we both mentioned, when an edit is made, it's quickly reviewed. And if there's false information, people do kind of tend to jump on that very quickly. So I would say it's accurate, but I do think in academic settings, unfortunately, that the idea of it being false, still remains. So you can't use it as a scholarly resource. But something else that I would recommend is when you're reviewing information on a page that is open to any editor, going on the talk page is sometimes a really good practice if you're using Wikipedia as a resource, because you can see what kind of debates are going on surrounding the topic that's being presented. So that can kind of give you more insight on how accurate maybe that specific piece of information on the page is. Because if you see on the talk page that everybody, that a specific section is being, hotly contested, then maybe for that specific piece of information, do some further research yourself. But I would say yes, that it tends to be quite accurate. So I do think that the kind of notion of Wikipedia is just this, free-for-all, anybody could say anything, and it tends to be false, is just not really true. So.
Can I ask one follow-up? Because I know we have to finish. Would you cite a printed encyclopedia in your academic work? Yes, but you wouldn't cite. I'm just curious. What compels you to cite an encyclopedia and not Wikipedia? There's no right or wrong. I'm just very curious.
I think that honestly goes just. I think that kind of goes back to like the kind of hierarchical way that research exists, especially in like an academia, in like professional fields as well. And I think that the fact that most people are more willing to cite a printed encyclopedia than they are to cite Wikipedia is probably because of the definity of it being already published and unchangeable. And that opens up a lot of issues, I think, because like then that just goes back to like, okay, but was it reviewed enough? Was it contested enough? Do we know that it's actually real and reliable and true? And I think that like a lot of people are more hesitant to use Wikipedia because it is changeable. But then again, that returns us back to like the gaps in knowledge production, which is like, it is so important to have discussion and debate and like to challenge the things that we think that we know in order to have accurate information. And that's like an ongoing process. So I do think it is interesting that like Wikipedia like can't be used as a scholarly source, but encyclopedias can. And the thing that I wanted to add to kind of what I was saying earlier about like, there's never underestimate the power of doing your own research, I think that like sometimes like things like encyclopedias and Wikipedia, because they can be so, because they can be very kind of broad and overarching. I think that if you're looking for specific things, it's very important to like, use those as a starting point. I would say the same thing about like a printed or published encyclopedia as well. Use it as a starting point and go from there, figure it out for yourself. Yes, that takes a lot longer. Yes, it's a lot more work, but also it's really satisfying. And I think that like encyclopedias can just be a really useful place to start when it comes to research, rather than it being the research itself.
Go ahead, and then I think we have to finish. Yes, unless someone has a final question, I think we'll finish. Okay, because you have another panel, I'm sure. Thank you so much, guys.
Thanks, panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you all for that. We are just going to do a quick transition because there's another panel coming up right after. Back to the next part, the Concordia Undergraduate Academic Conference, Communication Studies. The next panel, Mediated Affect. And just for those of you just joining us via Zoom, comments and questions, please put those in the chat. We'll read them out later on. For those of you here in the space, I think you know how things work, so I'll skip that part. It's just now my pleasure to pass things over to the moderator of today's panel, Owen Chapman, Professor in Communication Studies. Welcome back, Owen.
Thanks. Glad to be here for this panel on mediating affect. Like was just said, my name is Owen Chapman. I'm a professor in Communication Studies. I'm currently the BA Program Director. And I just have to say congratulations on what has been really a superb event so far. I've been teaching in Communication Studies for over 20 years. This is the first time I've come to this undergraduate conference, and I'm sorry that I haven't been before because it's really exceptional, super well organized. Congratulations to all the panelists and the presenters today. It's been really amazing. And thanks also to the Force Space. It's really great to be in this room. It's super exciting, and thanks for all the technical help. So on the panel today, like I said, on mediating affect, we have 3 presenters. We're going to move to my right here, starting with Alyssa Farinha-Amorim. And then we have Sydney Dos Santos, who will be going after, and Alex Saint-Jean Arsineau, who will be finishing us off. In my case, I think I'll just ask each presenter to go one after the other, giving them a little prompt to continue. I'll be writing down some questions, but we'll maybe start with a question once we get to that period and quickly turn it over to the audience because we have some really robust question and answers going on this morning. So I'll just try to get out of the way as soon as I can for that. All right, so without further ado, I'll pass the mic over to Alyssa to begin with her presentation, The Anxiety Behind Giving Your Computer an Orgasm.
Well, thank you. Hi, my name is Alyssa Farinha-Amorim. I'm a third-year Concordia student studying an honors in anthropology with a major in communications and cultural studies. And yeah, I'll be presenting my research on the anxiety behind giving your computer an orgasm. Well, this was initially kind of came out of a critical game review that I've written for Comms 333, which is Games, Media, and Cultures. And it was kind of near the beginning of the semester. I was very excited to write the paper, and I'm very happy to present it now. But I can say that, as you can imagine from the title, it was quite an awkward paper to write in the first place, especially playing the game and unknowingly with full volume and for my parents, which is great. But yeah, I'll start. So in terms of context, the game is called It Is As If You Were Making Love, and it's developed by Dr. Pippin Barr in 2018. It's a browser game online for free, so if anybody feels inclined, I would highly recommend it. And Dr. Pippin is a department chair and also professor in the Design and Computation Arts program at Concordia. But yeah, as you can imagine from the title, the game gives you truly a unique experience of giving your computer an orgasm. And in the kind of introduction to the game, the creator kind of advertises it in this way. So, physical intimacy is a thing of the past. Finally, but wait, why do you feel so alone? You want to touch somebody, make them feel good, but you don't really want to actually have to touch somebody. You don't really want to deal with another person. Well, you're in luck. With this new application, it is as if you're making love. Love. To go on, this is actually a gameplay that I've took a video of me playing the game because it's sometimes hard to kind of describe a game with the words alone. So it's a short 2-minute video. I'll play it now, but if it works. Oh, nope. If not, that's okay. Okay, well, we'll skip that part, but practically I'll try to describe it as best as I can. The computer tells you to move a slider between 2 different numbers at a certain pace. And if you don't meet that pace, there's also a progression bar at the bottom that kind of goes lower and lower, which is very, very awkward. And then as your computer is getting closer to climaxing, it the sound starts going faster and it sends you messages of move the slider faster, move it slower. Again, very, very awkward stuff, but that's practically it. For literature that I really depended on while writing this project was Mia Consalvo and Nathan Dutton's Game Analysis, developing a methodological toolkit for the qualitative study of games. Much like Pippin Barr, Consalvo is actually also a professor here in the Communication Studies program. And I really chose this kind of literature because it explains the interface, which is something that's really, really present inside the game itself. So the interface is described as any on-screen information that provides the player with information concerning the life, health, location, or status of the character, as well as battle or action menus. And in particular, the authors mention Anno 1503, The New World, which is a game, and they state that in that game in particular, the interface kind of denotes I'm blanking, but citizens, their needs grow more complex over time. and after also Thomas Malaby, who wrote Beyond Play, A New Approach to Games, who describes that games can be dangerous, not necessarily, like, they can be life-threatening sometimes, but they shouldn't be kind of thrown away from what's actually like the human experience, like what people go through every day. But yeah, they can be quite dangerous, and they can evoke other emotions outside of pleasure. So in the interface here, as if you're making love, the two interface parts, I would say, of the game that are more like that you see quite often is the progression bar, which again reveals how close a computer is to orgasming, and also the messages and alerts, which gives instructions to players on where to move the computer slider and how fast or slow. And one thing that really differs from what Consalvo mentions in our text is that, you know, as opposed to the status of the character or the player in the game, this is really denoting like the computer's status as a part in the game as well. It's not more concerned with what you're doing, it's more concerned how the computer is feeling. I'll go on, but to kind of conclude, how does the game play, like how does the game actually play into real life anxieties of physical intimacy, which is kind of my main argument that came out from writing this paper, is that Pippin Bar kind of describes the game as we created the game to provide a usable and efficient experience of pleasuring a partner without the distress and dissatisfaction of a physical body to navigate. This again would have been much easier to explain with the video, but like kind of to oppose it, there is quite a lot of distress for the players and quite a lot of dissatisfaction for the computer. The messages do kind of pop up quite regularly, and as the computer is closer to climaxing, the messages change a lot. The progression bar goes down if you're not kind of going with the demands of the computer, which is great. And so you can't help but look at the progression bar, you can't help but look at the messages, and you're kind of like stressing a little bit about, you know, moving the slider properly and like winning the game practically. So it kind of goes into this, at least when I was playing it, this subconscious awareness of like the fears regarding your own capabilities in acts of intimacy. And to kind of conclude, from my paper, the main question I got out of is, how can you give a person an orgasm if you can't do the same to your computer? Well, thank you.
So next we have Sydney Dos Santos. I don't have the title to, there we go. Tuning into Superstore.
Thank you. So, hi everybody. My project was born out of the Comms 305 Effective Communication class. We were asked to write a paper using the different theories and concepts that we were learning about effective communication and apply them to one particular media source. So I was going about my life, you know, I cook, I have music playing, I fold my laundry, I have a TV show playing, and I was pondering kind of on this idea of having like media as a background, as like a background scape through which we do ordinary tasks throughout our lives. And one of these media objects that I was particularly interested in was the show Superstore. It's a relatively new show. It started in 2015, wrapped filming in 2021. And I was curious as to why this quickly cemented itself in my repertoire of comfort TV shows, as I like to call them. I feel like we've kind of heard this term thrown around the internet here and there. And it really piqued my curiosity, and I was kind of curious about why this show in particular. So yeah. Anyways, if text can help me with my slides. Oh, perfect. So yeah, we're just going to look at some of the sources and concepts that I looked at throughout my paper, discuss some of the theoretical frameworks that kind of evolved from these, combining these concepts together, followed by the role of digital platforms when discussing media and these concepts, and then broader implications for digital media in general. Sorry about the tech issues. Computers don't tend to like me. If back one. Anyways, maybe it'll catch up with me. So the first kind of group of concepts is affect data manipulation, and as media professor Susanna Passonen describes, the price of media use, or kind of what we pay to use these free media sources. So affective intensities like interests, amusement, boredom, all of these kind of sensory experiences we have are the fuel that motivates the motions of users in media engagements. So affect is tracked, analyzed, and manipulated as data for corporate profit. So basically, we are generating this kind of labor that becomes commodified for big corporations to manipulate and keep us cemented in these media consumption cycles. So social media, and by extension digital platforms, they aim to glue users to their interfaces through this affective labor, creating value via attachment, intimacy, connection, and community. So the price of social media involves time, attention, and data, while affective ripples and releases are gained in return. Digital platforms, including streaming services, use user data to curate recommendations and optimize engagement, thus effectively manipulating them and their attention. This manipulation capitalizes on users' emotional responses and preferences. So because of these kind of emotional ties, it's a very effective tool. Then we have attention is also a very big concept throughout most of these sources. So Catherine Hales and Sam Anderson, and Catherine Hales is an American author. Sam Anderson is a literary critic. Sorry, I got that wrong. Catherine Hales is a literary critic. Anderson is an American author. Hales describes this kind of generational shift in cognitive styles away from deep attention, where you're kind of focusing on this one object for extended periods of time, into a more rapid shift between cognitive media objects. Anderson clarifies that multitasking isn't so much doing two things at once, rather it's more about shifting from task to task very rapidly. Then we have the idea of attachment, and what scholar Kathleen Stewart describes as worlding. So habits and rhythms kind of evolve and produce these worlds. And then there's these kind of pockets where you're kind of called to attention to the media itself and recognize the kind of source that you're looking at. So it kind of piques your attention more. And lastly, obviously, affect is a huge concept to explore. So there's this organization, Plan C, that's an anti-authoritarian communist organization that describe the kind of dominant affects throughout different stages of capitalism. So they describe how currently in this kind of late capitalism moment, the dominant affect is anxiety. I feel like we can all agree, we know many people in our lives that have discussed anxiety. It's a big topic of discussion in media in general. And so sources that kind of tune into this dominant affect effectively gain our attention. So as I discussed, Superstore gained my attention when I'm thinking about all of these different topics. Created and produced by Justin Spitzer, 6 seasons on NBC. Clearly, it's a fan favorite. It lasted for a while, and I'd like to explore kind of why. So as I discussed, hyperattention is the key for this generation's kind of dominant cognitive style. It facilitates us shifting, like I said, from task to task. So as I described before, something like folding laundry and watching a show, a piece of media that facilitates this kind of cognition becomes, it facilitates different tasks. Also, Anderson discussed that when you have these breaks in your attention and you can shift to a different task, it can reinforce the task, the primary task that you're trying to do. So if you're, for example, studying and you take a break and scroll through cat memes, it may actually facilitate you turning your attention back in afterwards to whatever thing you're trying to study. So again, I'm going to talk about worlding briefly. This occurs for me in Superstore when you're watching the show. It's very formulaic. It's very reminiscent of sitcoms that have come before it. It follows, it has this very tight plot line that has to evolve in a very quick time frame. It's like 20 some odd minutes. So, it's quick paced, it's mundane topics, it's in a superstore, it's in a chain department store. So it's a familiar setting. And the thing I like the most is it has these cutaway moments. I was going to show a video, but I don't think we have time, where there's never really dialogue. It's always a really quick comedic bit that, like I said, it disrupts the rhythm, so your attention is tuned back into the source. So, you're watching the show and this plot is evolving, and then all of a sudden you're watching some other bit play out where there's no dialogue and there's top 40s, typical generic music. So it really draws you back into the source. And then we have Paul Roquet. I'm not going to read this whole quote from him for the sake of time. He talks about ambient media, and he discusses how having media in the background kind of layers into your surroundings, and just really creates a unique experience, a kind of atmosphere unto its own. And it reinforces this sense of familiarity with the source that you're analyzing. As my slide here demonstrates, anxiety and familiarity, they kind of go hand in hand. When you're anxious, you want this sense of familiarity, like a security blanket almost around you. So having a show like Superstore or another comfort TV show, typically it's reruns or something you're very familiar with, it really reinforces these anxiety feelings that you're having, and can kind of quell them to a certain extent. Obviously, I don't want to go on, but user data, the way they curate content, the interface of platforms such as Netflix with autoplay features and having suggested content for you at the bottom of whatever you're watching, it really, like we discussed before, glues the user to the screen and cements them in this media consumption cycle. So broader implications of this, we can think of the concept of doom scrolling when you're sucked into your device. And yeah, we can apply these terms to digital media in general and extend it to social media and just any other kind of media. Thank you.
Oh, yes, sorry, Alex. I was still thinking about what the last panelist was saying. So we have Alex who will be presenting Feminism, Masculinity Misguided. Please take it away.
Hi. Hello. Yeah. Hi, I'm Alex, second year student in communications here at Concordia. My presentation today is, as you can see, it's based off of feminism, but mainly focused on the manosphere and what their points of view that they share in there, and making the claim that their arguments towards feminism are misguided, and that they are actually fighting the same battle that feminism is fighting. Can I just have the clicker there? So basically, there seems to be this sort of epidemic among younger men and teenage boys, and they sort of feel like there's this threat of a declining masculinity. This sort of panic towards, the death of masculinity. They feel as if the shift in equality that feminism is looking for is ultimately seeking to alter sort of the masculine framework that they have learned to grow up in. This is actually not a new phenomenon, though. So this can be actually traced back to the 60s and 70s with the men's liberation movement, which was, it first started as a way to attract men to feminism, but then it eventually branched off to an anti-feminist men's rights sort of activist group. In direct response to basically second wave feminism, or I guess their perception of it. So essentially what happened is these men believed that they were actually the true victims of oppression in terms of sexism. This also wasn't aided by the fact that while feminism does seek for the inclusion of men, there were a lot of, not a lot, there were few anti-male feminists in the movement at that time, but their voices were louder, and this was actually exacerbated and perpetuated with conservative media. This sort of justified this anti-feminist view. Ironically, though, they are fighting the same battle, right? Two sides of the same coin. Ultimately, their arguments are against sexism. Men's rights tend to focus more on male issues such as custody laws, suicide rates. But again, as I go through this, we'll see that this is actually just patriarchal sexism imposed on them. So what happened is they sort of grew in popularity, these voices, and over time they shifted online to what is the manosphere. This is an amalgamation of subreddits and forums. Originally started more as forums, moved into subreddits. Started mainly as more like misogyny, like with like pickup artists and things like this, and over time sort of evolved into more vitriolic hate speech with subreddits such as art incels, and eventually they had their own forum, which they were really vitriolic with their speech, right? It was very hateful. It was no more just how to pick up women, but it was more so why we hate women. And within these subreddits and forums, you'll find actually that the way that they try and present their arguments, hear me out, in a logical manner. So they use this sort of topos technique. So basically a topos is, it works essentially as a warrant or conclusion in that they justify the transition from the supporting evidence to a controversial statement, right? So one example that we see on these forums a lot is a topos of justice. So this would be an implication that if a person, action, or situation is equal in specific respects, like if persons, actions, or situations are equal in specific respects, then they should be treated and dealt with in the same way. So if we go here, Manosphere analyzed, these are some of the quotes that I found in some of the research. You can take time to read this. I'm not going to read them. But basically, men viewed feminism, feminists, and women in general as manipulative, aggressive, and threatening. A lot of the views were that, upholding the fact that men are actually the true victims of oppression, and that this fight for equality is really just being used as a vehicle for women to accrue wealth through the exploitation of wealthier men, really just trying to unjustify this whole wave of equality. Men also felt as if they were being excluded from this fight for equality by citing a perceived neglect towards men's issues, again, such as custody laws, the rights of the father, so on and so forth. Hello? Yeah. So basically, here, I argue that, although their speech is hateful and vitriolic, it fundamentally underlies a pain that men are feeling, a pain that is misguided, but a pain nonetheless that is felt. And this pain comes through sort of the framework that patriarchy instills masculinity in men. So I used research from a male feminist author called Michael Kaufman. Here he introduces a concept called the conflicting experiences of power, contradictory experiences of power. Basically, this means that patriarchy imposes a hegemonic form of masculinity that neglects different masculinities that every man can feel. So basically a one-man-fits-all approach, an approach that seeks men to accrue control, domination, and power. Basically, to be a man is to exert control and domination in order to have power. Now, this sort of idea is built up by the creation of a gendered personality that they view through the family when they're younger, and they sort of build these ideas viewing these gendered power dynamics, and as they grow older, what happens is this pain comes about because they realize that their views of masculinity imposed by patriarchy do not fit into an intersectional world. So the consequences is you have a fear of, a cycle of fear and pain. And this creates an isolation and alienation within these men. And this cycle and fear of pain is, as Michael Kaufman would put out, driven by homophobia, right? This fear of losing control through emotions and basic human needs. Anything that is deemed not as controllable is deemed as feminism, therefore, deemed as feminine, therefore, the idea of femininity is antithetical to power. Yeah. Moving forward, let's see if I can bang this out quickly. So male participation in feminism. These are quotes by Kaufman and bell hooks, which I'm sure everyone is familiar with, but basically saying that men definitely do have a spot in feminism, especially considering that since they are the main perpetrators of this oppression, they have to take accountability. And let's go forward. One possible solution is self-determination theory, basically teaching men how to be autonomous, to be able to internalize a feminist approach to their lives as something inherently needed to them. And that is it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Alex. Thank you to the three panelists for giving us a taste of some really interesting research projects that have multiple ways that we could engage with them. I tried to find a question that could maybe link all three. So if you all could take a moment to maybe think about this idea and each take a turn commenting on it. So the panel is about the idea of mediated affect. And I feel like each of you spoke to the notion of the interface in different ways, right? So with Alyssa, we have a kind of weird interfacing, you know, a use of an interface of a computer that we're used to, but in a way that we're really not normally using it, calling attention to maybe the interface itself. And then with Sydney, we have a kind of maybe an unintended or an off-label kind of interfacing when using a TV show as a type of comfort, you know? And so I wonder about the interface in that scenario, like what is being manipulated in your example. And with Alex, we have a kind of hateful interfacing, if you might, you know, with forums and subreddits and that kind of thing. So in each of your research programs, can you speak about the idea of the interface and how you think it relates to the notion of affect or the affective quality of the phenomena that you're talking about? Maybe we could start with Alyssa.
If it's a good way, I'll go last. I have to figure out what I'm going to say.
Okay, sure.
I guess I will address this question by default. It's a big question, so I appreciate that. It's a lot to think about. For my project, when you say interface, I think you're talking about the user's interaction, am I right, with the piece of media? What was interesting to me when I was thinking about my project is the design of the interface that you're interacting with when you're streaming things. I think this concept of comfort TV is born in an age of digital media and streaming, which is no coincidence. The fact that you have features like autoplay where it can just continue with no interaction from the user, it kind of facilitates this idea. So I think if we didn't have that feature, this whole concept wouldn't exist quite as much or like to the extent that it does. Yeah, and I was thinking it was interesting to think about how with these autoplay features, the action on the user or on the consumer's behalf is not to continue to engage, but the action is necessary to cease consumption. Right. So it's an interesting kind of dynamic that comes out of that.
Thanks. Alex, do you have a response?
Yeah, so in terms of this interface that we're looking at, which is these subreddits and forums, I think what makes this space so successful in accumulating more viewership amongst younger men, is that through the research, basically what happens is the way this framework of masculinity is opposed on men, it ultimately involves a competition, you know, an in-group versus an out-group. And a lot of the times that in-group versus out-group mentality isn't necessarily towards women, but it's also among men themselves. And what ends up happening there is that because hegemonic masculinities, because their whole point is to basically claim that there's one type of masculinity, one that can allow a man to accumulate control, exert dominance, you know, have power. What they end up doing is they only concern themselves on whether they're being a good man or not with other men. Also, this like search for power creates this sort of isolation, right? When you're repressing emotional needs or just basic human needs, you tend to isolate yourself. So this framework sort of reinforces the fact that isolation is required to achieve this outcome. So what ends up happening is these men, ultimately, they just find spaces that have men with similar ideas, and it allows them not to challenge their ideals, right? So basically, these forums allow men to go on there who are feeling the same way, saying, hey, I feel like this. Another man is going, I also feel like this. But what has happened is over time, since that split from the original intention of the men's liberation movement, sort of, you know, propagated with like this conservative media, as we see now with like influencers like the Andrew Tates of the world, is that you know, this idea that feminism is anti-male has sort of allowed them to keep that train of thought moving forward, as well as having that idea in the background that I'm not doing enough to be a man. So these forums allow them to sort of...
There's like a feedback and an isolation and a group collectivity that happens all together, and it's all mediated through these forums. And what about you, Alyssa? Have you come to some conclusions? Well, the idea of the interface, and I think about like this game, did you talk to Dr. Barr, for instance, and ask him like, what were you trying to achieve by getting us to furtively move our mouse back and forth? Like, it's such a strange way to use a computer.
I think like, I mean, I would have loved to talk to Dr. Barr. I've like, and especially if I would consider to do this as a further research, I would love to get in contact with him. But I think like the way that the interface is used is really, really special, because usually it's, well, while it is weird to actually have to manually like move the slider back and forth, press OK, if like the computer is like, oh yeah, you're not going fast enough. But I feel like there's a greater risk when it's like when the interface is fixed on something else as opposed to you. Mm-hmm. Like, you know, if I'm playing a video game and I know that I'm gonna die soon, at least I see it and I know how to kind of like react to that. And like in terms of this game, where the computer is like actively telling you, no, you're doing this wrong, no, you're doing this fine, it kind of highlights those faults and highlights kind of like, wow, I'm just really bad at this game. But I think that like I guess the mediated effect of that is like, again, it makes you realize or internalize like your own faults as kind of as a person trying to play this game and failing completely.
And in a way, it highlights the agency of the computer somehow to kind of put you in your place.
It gives it a life as opposed to just a screen, I guess.
Right. Thank you very much for those terrific answers. I'd like to turn it to the floor now for people. If you have questions from the audience, please.
For those of you in the audience, feel free to raise your hand and we can bring a microphone to you. Any of you online or on YouTube, if you'd like to ask a question, you can just type it into the chat and we'll read it out loud. Are there any questions in the space? Right here.
Yeah, so I have a question for the masculinity and feminism presentation. I was wondering if you could maybe just elaborate a little bit more on the role of affect within these forums, because I think maybe I missed it, or I think because I was listening, but I think maybe that point just got like a little lost, and also the way that affect is like related to the way that these men are kind of like interacting with each other on the forums as well.
Yeah. So I think a lot of the times within these forums, there's a lot of personal experiences that are shared between these men. And I think that these experiences are creating a response that's sort of justifying their views within that community, right? And this is where it gets tricky, is because, you know, it's hard to invalidate someone's experience, but it's easy to acknowledge when the conclusion that they come from that experience is misguided, as my title says. But that's the thing, the men in these spaces, they call it a lack of education or whatever, or could be ignorance, whatever it is, they don't understand the external forces. So really it's this sharing of like personal experiences, whether it be something that they felt or that they saw, witnessed secondhand. This is really like reinforcing these negative ideas within these spaces, right? So it's really like they're getting that personal connection that they feel like they're missing otherwise, but with other people that are sort of sharing those harmful beliefs with them. I don't know if that answers your question well enough.
Yeah, I think so. Thank you.
Any other questions in the audience? Any questions online? Nothing yet.
Well, I have another question to ask, if that's okay. I was writing down a bunch of things while you were speaking. If we could again come back to this notion of affect, I'm curious, you know, if we understand affect as this kind of like precognitive state, you know, we don't even have feelings or emotions worked out yet. It's this kind of just like state of being affected by the world. Again, each of you is speaking to like a nuanced relationship to that type of state. So my question around interfaces was about trying to sort of tease out what that sort of state is. So I guess I could ask each of you, like, what do you think is the kind of affective state with which people approach these types of experiences? Whether it's a video game or this video game in particular, but gaming maybe in general, watching shows for comfort or heading out onto the internet looking for community. What is the kind of the sort of the pre-existing state in which those encounters are occurring? Sorry, that's not a very well articulated question. Let me put it in a different kind of way. In each case, you're talking about a new kind of digital affordances, right? You're talking about a video game, you're talking about streaming services, you're talking about these kind of online fora. And again, in my imagination, and I'm asking the question, so I'm not expecting that I've got it right, but that in my imagination, there's a scenario in which all of these experiences is happening, which is quite solitary, right? Where you're sitting in front of this screen and you've got a mouse or you've got your telephone or you've got your whatever, and there's this kind of experience that you're seeking out. So again, the affective kind of state that one is in when that type of experience is what you're looking for is complex. And I think it's being teased out by each of you in different ways. So if you could speak a little bit more to just how the notion of affect fits into your research subjects, how that idea of not even knowing exactly what you're feeling yet, but being in a kind of state and then being present in front of a screen, how does that affect the dynamics of the phenomena that you're talking about?
Well, in my case, as I mentioned, the dominant affect being anxiety in this late stage of capitalism. I think that when users are going into these situations where they're putting something on in the background to complete their tasks, that's where that tendency is being born from. It's this general state of anxiety just overall. And so the user is kind of trying to circumvent this anxious feeling surrounding whatever task they're trying to accomplish by putting something on in the background as like a numbing effect. One of my sources that I didn't really get to touch on too much in my presentation, Susanna Scholler, she was talking about podcasts and how they kind of isolate the user and draw them into this piece of media that engages them, but fundamentally they're checked out of because they're doing whatever it is in their day. You know, if you're walking and listening to a podcast, the walking is the thing that is dominating your actions at the moment. So yeah, I think extending that to streaming services and having something playing in the background, I think that's kind of the state that people are experiencing, is this isolation and just general state of anxiety. That's kind of like the baseline that we're all operating on right now.
And the media that they choose to put on in the background is a way to kind of increase noise or create some sort of protective bubble to push that anxiety at bay, that keep that affective state kind of somewhat reduced?
Yeah. I mentioned as well, Paul Roquette, I think it was a chapter in a book called Media Ambience, I think it was. He talked about walking through the streets of New York and how all of the construction noises and car noises and all of this was really heightening his anxiety. And so he would put on like elevator music and thinking it would kind of drown out the noises. And what actually happened is it kind of layered into the existing noises and created this new ambience. So I think that is what's happening with this idea of comfort TV shows, is you're kind of layering in this other layer of media to quell other noises, and when I say noises, I don't just mean like sensory actual noises, just, you know, interrupting thoughts.
Great, thank you for a much more succinct answer to my rambling question. And then Alyssa, I'm kind of wondering what the state is that people come to this type of play, like who's looking for this type of experience?
I mean, speaking of, well, at least I think in general, video games, people always have kind of a notion of what they might be experiencing or anticipating what feelings they might be feeling, just because people maybe have talked about the video game before. You know, there's been reviews sent out about it already. But my own experience is I didn't really read the information about the text.
Okay.
It was more so I accessed it through the syllabus, which only just says the name of the video game and the creator. So, I mean, I didn't know what really to anticipate to like what I was feeling. But I think because of not reading what the video game was about, I was kind of left in a constant state of like confusion. Because again, it's not, you know, the topic of giving your computer an orgasm isn't necessarily something that's very popular in video games, I would say. But I think it's just in general, I mean, again, this is my own experiences, but just the bizarreness of having that as your main point in a video game, just you can't help but invoke like a sense of confusion, or because again, it's such a weird thing to do. And even now, like I went back to it recently, and I still felt that confusion, even though I already knew what the game was about. I've already written a paper about it, and yeah.
Okay, thanks. Do we have time for Alex to add his comments too? Yeah, okay. Yeah, so it seems like in these forums, people are obviously looking for community, but there's also, as you've articulated in your slides, there's a kind of a desire for belonging and for being understood, but also for independence, and there's isolation going on. So again, it's the affective state that I'm curious about.
Yeah, so I think what drives men to these forums initially is some sort of sadness or fear, or even an anxiety of not achieving some sort of standard. And I would say the main the main, I guess their main focus as to going onto these forums is really to find this sense of belonging, but I think to also sort of validate the notion that they're not alone in that experience, sort of finding that comfort. And my research really didn't go into like the end goal of what they aimed to get out of this. It really just focused like on the discourse between the people in there. But the conclusion that I came from was really just to just really this search for comfort and just belonging, right? Just to validate their own experience born out of a fear, a pain, a sadness, and exclusion.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, I see. I think we have time for one last question, so I'll grab this one from the audience, and that will be that. Thank you.
Hi, my question is also for Alex, because I had done some previous research projects on trad wives, and I think there's a lot of kind of parallels, if it's like, could be really just a counterpart to that. So trad wives very much in the post-feminist context, they're like, hey, we are educated now, we've got jobs now, and we're still unhappy. So kind of seeing that it seems to be something very similar, pushing men towards a manosphere and maybe pushing women also towards trying to find this traditional femininity because they don't really know where to go nowadays. I was wondering if in your research you came across maybe options where instead of being torn apart with anxiety, if there was any space found maybe where these anxieties are addressed like together instead of just completely breaking apart in what seems to be like a kind of the same anxiety of not really knowing how to perform gender.
Yeah.
It's a big question.
Yeah. Sorry, could I just get like a more just like succinct summary on that? Because that was
sorry.
A lot to process.
I think that men and women are seeking maybe traditional gender, and it's bringing them apart in what seems to be like a very similar anxiety. So men are going towards a manosphere and women are going towards like trad wives. So it's like not knowing how to perform gender in like this day and age. And I was curious if in your research you would come across ways that these anxieties had been addressed together. So like not knowing how to perform
issues,
femininity.
But part of a whole?
Well, yeah, but so for men and women to be together and to say like, well, none of us really know how to perform gender, and maybe addressing it as a group, as opposed to just always breaking off and being like, well, I don't know how to perform masculinity, so I got to go towards other men. I don't know how to perform femininity, so I'm with all these other women. Like, is there a space where these anxieties can be addressed together?
Yeah, I do think there is a solution for that. So my research discussed self-determination theory, which sort of helps bridge the gap between sort of how like men and women view sexism and how it should be played out within like the gender roles. I think the biggest takeaway from self-determination theory was really was like helping men internalize feminist values, and a lot of this was from having discussions with feminist and other feminist men as well, so to sort of see that they could have, or like seeing representation within their own group on the other side, and also talking to the other side to to come together and understand how this one system is affecting both of them. I will say that the theory did have its limitations, but I think like the overall aspect of what self-determination theory was hoping to do was good. I hope that answered your question, but it was really just getting the conversation started, but having men understand that this conversation, that feminist values aren't opposed to men, and you know that they're not just for women, that inherently they are for them, because the system that they are within is also affecting them. So just having them understand that they need to get that conversation going.
Okay, great. So I think that's all the time for questions we have. I'll just throw it back to you, Owen, if you had anything, or if anyone had any final comments before we wrap up.
Yeah, does any panelist have a thing they're dying to say? They'll feel bad if they leave here without saying. Well, thank you very much for a very stimulating panel and really interesting perspectives and research projects that are going on here, and I look forward to learning more. So thanks everybody for being here this afternoon. My pleasure. Yeah.
Wonderful. We'll be taking a short break here, about 15 minutes. And when we get back, we will be having our final keynote of the day from Phia L. Dolgin. So at 3:45. Thank you, everybody.
And welcome back. Welcome back to the Concordia Undergraduate Academic Conference, Communication Studies. Final keynote of the day. I just want to let you know, however, that we are streaming to YouTube from Forespace, and we are located here on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. And those of you joining us by Zoom, comments or questions, please pop those into the chat, and we'll do our best to read those out later on. Those of you here in the space, you know how it works. Okay. That's much my pleasure to hand it over for their keynote, Judge My Book by Its Cover, Heteropessimism and the Rise of Cartoonish Romance Covers. Phia Dolgin. Phia, welcome in.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. It's a real honor to be presenting at CUACCS, let alone being one of its keynote speakers. So for those of you who have been here all day, thank you for staying, and for those of you just arriving, thank you so much for dropping in. I encourage everyone to stay immediately after my keynote or my speaker. There's going to be kind of an art expo, production expo of some of my peers' work. It's really great. It's just going to be in this space, so I recommend everyone stick around for that. That'll be happening at 4:15 immediately once I'm done. So with that, I guess let's begin. The last few years have seen significant changes in the publishing industry, primarily motivated by the rise of Book Talk, an online community taking place on social media platform TikTok that recommends books, encourages monthly reading challenges, and markets overpriced fandom-themed advent calendars during the holidays. This community of book influencers have both made and broken authors' entire careers. They are also held largely responsible for reigniting mass cultural interest in reading, while also paving the way for books to become kind of fast fashion. I can't quite stress the extent of the power Book Talk has over the publishing industry, but anyone who has stepped foot recently in an independent or Indigo bookstore and seen an As Seen on TikTok display might know what I'm talking about. Along with this newfound investment in books, readers are also noticing a growing uniformity, both in content and in marketing, among contemporary releases that seemingly all try to follow whatever model will make their book go viral. This is especially prevalent in the romance genre. Books appear to be increasingly selling themselves by playing explicitly into stated tropes. And book displays themselves, as I mentioned earlier, book covers begin to all look virtually the same, even though they're written by different authors. So common features for romance in particular now include cartoonish characters that are often positioned either back to back or on opposite sides of the cover, along with abstract objects loosely tied to characters' interests. Covers also tend to use girlish, bright colors like teal, pink, or neon orange, while consistent typography is typically in either block or cursive font. Not so far off, in another internet-mediated space, There have been notable increases in public discourse expressing dissatisfaction with the heterosexual dating pool from both men and women. This phenomena being identified in 2019 by Asa Suresen and labeled heteropessimism. It has also been noted by other journalists and thinkers more recently to have only worsened, especially in light of Trump's recent election. This presentation addresses the question of how romance, a genre that is profoundly optimistic in its approach of heterosexual relationships, can continue to not just exist, but thrive in a digitally mediated, post-heteropessimistic world. The answer I suggest is that romance novels continue to thrive by shielding themselves within ultimately self-conscious liminal worlds represented on their cartoon covers. I should begin by giving a bit of a romance history, starting at the Harlequin. The timeline I draw is something I drew for my own research purposes, focused on cover art, but there's about 1 million different timelines one can draw looking at the romance book that start earlier than where I'm starting, and that include things that I just wasn't able to include for the sake of time. But I felt that was worth a disclaimer that I am skimming a bit here. So published by Harlequin Books Limited in the latter half of the 20th century, the Harlequin romance is highly identifiable for its hyper-realistic art style and, of course, the drama. Although despite its cover art, it's quite similar to contemporary romance today. A relatable woman meets a stoic yet protective man she's adequately enamored with and aroused by him, and as such, she finds a fulfilling relationship and self-worth. There's quite a bit of angst combined with sexual tension in the interim, but what I'm trying to stress is that these books were made to be enjoyed and binge read, appealing to emotional kind of states. Much like the criticisms people have of contemporary romance today, the novels are samey, repetitive, and embrace that to the point of using the same cover model, Fabio, for years and marketing that as an asset to these books. The covers themselves illustrate the genre's melodrama through the characters' facial expressions. Sexual tension is visible in the specific way these characters hold each other with both fervor and delicatesse, a position that is even given its own name, the clinch, for how kind of popular and prevalent it is. And finally, the hyper-realistic art that harkens back to traditional paintings and a loosely historic, more primal time where things were older, men were manlier, and everyone was super hot. I don't know, I'm not a history person. But we digress. These books don't pretend to be anything other than what they are. They relish in their own camp. They boldly exclaim their status as fantasies that you are meant to project yourself into. This brings us to the early 2000s, where there's an increased demand in reaction to these books for more female-centered romances, especially following TV and film releases of Sex and the City and Bridget Jones's Diary, respectively. This environment is the emergence of chick lit. Here, the content is more focused on girl power and often doesn't provide an obvious romantic love interest. The women in these stories are more focused on pursuing their own careers and making sense of their own bodies and identities. There is also often a materialistic theme or characters navigating materialism within their worlds, which isn't so strange when understanding at this time power to buy whatever one desired was deeply intertwined with independence, something that arguably persists today. Although their content is quite distinct from contemporary romance, I draw the link back to these books, one, for their cultural relevance in shaping how women perceived heterosexual experience in the 2000s, but more importantly, two, for their visual similarity and resonance with contemporary novels today. Notably, these relatively minimal, girlish designs, again, the pink and the teal, the cartoon characters, and giving a final product that seems more targeted to young girls than to women. So, if anyone doesn't quite know what I'm talking about yet, I present figures 12 through 33. Now, I should begin by saying not all romance books look like this. Not even all popular romance books look like this. Colleen Hoover being likely the most popular example of deviating from this trend, playing into other trends instead. However, the trend of cartoon covers has become so increasingly prevalent and visible that if you look at romance genre in Goodreads Choice Awards from 2018 to now, or even go online and Google contemporary romance, you'll be blown away not only by the sheer number of books that follow this aesthetics trend, but also the number of essays and video essays alike trying to explain the phenomena. Having done this research a year ago and now coming back to the topic, I was genuinely taken aback by just how much research has been published and is new to this topic since I originally researched. In fact, the style is so prevalent, it's seeped into queer romance, as seen on the cover of Casey McQuiston's Red, White, and Royal Blue, which is covered up right now, but is on the top, on the right side, and was implemented most recently, and with a lot of outrage, on a new series of Jane Austen editions with forewords written by famous contemporary romance authors, and those are on the far right, the series of 3. Contemporary romance follows plots that have angst and sexual tension of the Harlequin, similarly brawny male characters, but also features a self-deprecating and career-driven female leads of chick lit. Before I commit to fully discussing just the covers, I gotta note that the content of these books is genuine in its positivity, often showing how heterosexual relationships can be fulfilling in and of themselves, and as a means of self-discovery. They also include explicit sexual content. Yes, every single one of these books features explicit sexual content. Not the Jane Austens, but the other ones. I bring this up only because you quite literally wouldn't know it to look at it. Without an adequate initiation into the genre, there is no reason to expect these books to contain what is essentially erotica. These novel covers are peppy in their bright colors and often platonic-looking cartoon characters. Even the characters kissing or being affectionate are illustrated to be cute, a far cry from the sexually charged clinch of the Harlequin. So then why is there such a disparity between the content of these books and what is being represented on the cover? Well, in 2019, Asa Sorensen coins the term heteropessimism, referring to this, quote unquote, performative disaffiliation with heterosexuality, usually expressed in the form of regret, embarrassment, or hopelessness about the straight experience. Essentially, heteropessimism is a sentiment performed primarily online of profound frustration and dissatisfaction with heterosexual relationship dynamics by both men and women. Here, I focus more on the women's side, which pinpoints men as the issue, where online discourse centers on how men don't try hard, treat women as disposable, and are generally unpleasant to be around. Lines, hashtags, and tweets, such as implying that women would choose to be gay if they could, or hashtag heterosexuality is a prison, implying that straight women are themselves confined against their will. Sorensen notes that a purpose of heteropessimism is to protect against over-intensity of feeling and form an attachment that can survive detachment. In a more recent article in the New York Times, published just this past year by Mary Solis, she repurposes Sorensen's term to discuss heteropessimism in the light of Trump's recent election. She makes similar observations to what Sorensen notes in 2019, with a continued explosion of women saying they are deleting dating apps, female celebrities declaring vows of celibacy and identifying as self-partnered. But this is matched with an absence of a mass movement of women actually doing this. Sorensen's careful to highlight that these feelings are still grounded in something legitimate, but that the match of lack of practice or action seems to be saying or communicating that there is something redeemable about heterosexuality, or women would be making the changes that they're threatening to make. The reason I bring up heteropessimism as an interesting lens through which to look at romance novels is that although these
are two separate internet communities, they comprise a Venn diagram with a not insignificant overlap, leading to women who are vocal online about struggling to find their book boyfriend in real life and turning to romance books to cope with the realities of heterosexual dating. Moreover, as women chatting with friends and being online, heteropessimism becomes a sentiment that permeates beyond individual communities and comes to shape contemporary culture in subtle ways. I would argue the content of contemporary romance, however, is antithetical to heteropessimism. I say this because it exists within the exact same context and ultimately addresses a lot of the same issues, but takes an opposite hetero-optimistic approach. Nowhere is this clearer than in the widely popular grumpy ex-sunshine trope, where the female lead character is quirky, lovely, and loving, and the male romantic interest is stoic, reserved, and according to the naive sunshine main character who is blind to the agonizing love of the male character, might even hate her. This trope explicitly contends with women struggling with emotionally unavailable men, reshaping it into a fantasy where dismissal really signifies romantic feelings that are so deep he can't even begin to express them. It also reimagines this behavior as profoundly committed and secretly loving if you scratch below the surface. This addressing familiar concerns ultimately as the heteropessimists address. Another piece that I have to come back to is the presence of erotica that depicts fulfilling heterosexual sex with male characters that are giving in bed, put women's pleasure first, and take enjoyment from performing sexual tasks that primarily pleasure the women. This is yet another hetero-optimistic response to the assumed unfulfilling sex in heteropessimistic discourse. There is a lot of discourse online asking moral questions about whether these book covers set up a wrong tone by aesthetically appealing to young readers while having adult content. But I think a more interesting question, at least for me in my research, was why would adult women want to disguise arousing erotica in covers that could be mistaken as teen lit? And this, I would argue, signals a certain shame around finding pleasure in heterosexuality. How does one sell a hetero-optimistic book to a jaded, disillusioned generation of hetero-pessimists? By having covers that don't take themselves too seriously. Presenting a novel that genuinely promotes self-fulfillment through heterosexuality in a self-deprecating wrapping, where the characters look at each other sassily so as not to signal or divulge their overwhelming attractions. The characters themselves keep their hearts close to their chest by not illustrating the realness of their affections on the cover. So, as Sørensen notes, protecting against the over-intensity of feeling and forming an attachment that can survive the detachment as represented on the cover. There are many critiques to be had with heteropessimistic perspective. Notably, Sørensen writes, heteropessimism does not seek to change the very real disparities between men and women. Indeed, it takes as given that women are simply resigned to heterosexual relationships, reflecting the worst of these inequities forevermore. Sørensen also notes that heteropessimism has worked to silence articulations of women's desires. It's easy then to assume that hetero-optimism is the solution, which expects and demands better from men. I mean, some women do report having higher standards for their heterosexual relationships after reading these kinds of books. However, hetero-optimism, despite being able to imagine a man being cold and distant because he secretly loves you, cannot imagine a man that just isn't cold and distant. I'm using hyperbole here, but my point remains the same. The stories themselves are inseparable from their hetero-pessimistic environments, and the cartoon covers signal to readers that their desires, both romantic and sexual, are cute and childlike fantasies. I will end echoing some of what Sørensen has already stated, that it's important to see heteropessimism as a symptom of a much larger problem and not the solution to those problems. In some ways, an uncritical hetero-optimistic perspective isn't much better. Ultimately, the world of contemporary romance, with its bright colors, playful covers, and familiar tropes, when situated within Western digital spaces, offers a lens through which we can see heteropessimism play out and better understand both people's desires and what they find lacking in heterosexual relationships today. I hope this presentation has shown that that we can take these books that are often dismissed as banal or low literature seriously. We gain a deeper understanding of people themselves and what romance at its core is really speaking to, desire. Thank you. I can open the floor up for questions if anybody has any.
For those of you here in the space, you probably already know the drill. Raise your hand and we'll get a microphone to you. Anyone online, especially if you're just joining us, feel free to ask questions. You can just type them in the chat and we'll be sure to read them out loud. So is there anyone in the space that would like to get us started? I see one already. Here we go.
Thank you for your presentation. I just wanted to ask, how much do you think, so like you said about the downfall of the energy in book covers, that now they're much more like just looking at each other, but before they were like the bodice rippers. How much do you think that that's reflective of just general apathy in our culture about everything, about existence, about capitalism? Or so do you think like romance is a reflection of that and how we show that through books?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. There's been a lot of presentations today, I think, centering on just the anxiety of like a post-capitalistic world. And I think heteropessimism is one of those sort of pleas for ambivalence that you're talking about. Like I would categorize heteropessimism as one of many forces and feelings that fall under this, like, I guess you could argue like a generation of more detached people. And yeah, like a big piece of what Saracen says is that like the goal is to detach, to not want to see hope in heterosexuality, and to sort of be self-deprecating, to have this negativity towards it so that you can kind of be negative before it gets you, like self-deprecation in general. And so I think it speaks exactly what you're talking about, that just like anxiety today around being too feeling, and a certain numbness. And I would categorize, I think, heteropessimism in that category. Yeah.
Oh, and then I had another question. I'm so sorry. Do you think that there's any difference between the book covers written by men and the book covers written by women?
That's a really good question. There's a whole other side of like book covers that I didn't talk about, which are like the one that I would say Colin Hoover falls into, of like flowers or like abstract looks and then like big text over it. And then there's also another one that I didn't get the chance to talk about, which is basically like men in like suits or even shirtless, but like just this part of their bodies, like holding their arms like this. And I couldn't tell you because I don't think I've spent enough time like noting, oh, this was written by a man, this was written by a woman, and like making that kind of archive. There's a really interesting archive online by, give me a second, Alice Liang, who does this like crazy digital archive, digital essay that has like so many book covers considered. So I think I would explore that to better like figure that out. But this is definitely, I'm pretty sure that almost every single book that I had up there was written by a woman. Yeah.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions in the space? Oh, I see one in the back row here.
Really interesting presentation. I loved it. And I noticed how in the beginning you mentioned like the really like hyper realistic book covers, and how because like they were too explicit, people then like did like cartoon covers. But then now I'm seeing that there's even more minimalistic covers, because like now people, they realize like, oh, the thing that people use to like cover up like cringy romance stories are now then becoming cringy. It's like a whole cycle again. So I feel like now like like there's a lot of like designers that I follow on social media, and they're struggling because they're like, okay, this art style that I developed that was really successful for like this period of time has now become cringy. So where do you think the future of like book covers is gonna happen? Because like women's pleasures of like reading romances is like becoming cringy again, right? So.
Yeah, I think you speak to something really interesting, which I just I couldn't fit into all of this. It's just that there's always been shame around reading romance. There's like extra book covers that you could purchase that like in Victorian times you would use to cover your romance novels, like a reusable cover that you could keep kind of covering your books with. I think the Harlequin is like a weird moment in time where they were like so explicit about desire, and that was kind of okay, but also these books were kind of looked down on. And I think romance as a genre has always been looked down on. So it's sort of new, but it's also sort of a continuation of the same thing. I guess my argument is more that the reason why there's shame around it has maybe changed and evolved into something different. I don't know. I mean, I'm seeing like covert romance novel covers where like people are taking on the task of republishing a bunch of books with like plain covers that are like literally just purple. And there's like the name of the two characters, like this person and this person. And that being kind of a more safe way to like be able to read your book in public and not be ashamed of it. I think I would need to be able to predict like where heteropessimism is going and like people's own shame about romanticizing romance is going, and that I don't think I am qualified to make a prediction on.
Do we have any other questions in the space? Yes, I see one right here.
Okay, I might struggle to articulate this, so give me a second. I think something that you mentioned was, like very briefly mentioning that there are people who have flagged these covers as potentially being confusing to young readers. But what I also find interesting is an angle of that is like the conversation surrounding the death of the tween and the fact that there's very little, whether it's like clothing or literature or television, there's very little that is targeted towards particularly young girls that are in a state of becoming. So do you think that the sort of juvenile nature of these books, especially considering a lot of these romance books center around like 28-year-olds or like 29-year-olds or 30-year-olds, which is a little bit different from in television, like when we see like the 18-year-old heroine. So do you think that the sort of juvenile nature of the covers has to do something with the death of the tween space, or that those are just two unrelated phenomena? Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I think it could be argued that it's a bit of a reappropriation of like an art style, and there's the meme of like millennials who are really attached to like being kids of that era. And I do think like the visual similarities between chick lit of the early 2000s and contemporary romance today is uncanny. And then if you kind of connect that to the majority of people reading these romances right now are older Gen Z and millennials, like people who would have engaged with that media, you could make a completely separate argument that the goal is really like to appeal to nostalgia within like this group of people by kind of doing a continuation of the aesthetic that they would have been used to from like 17 magazine or like Confessions of a Shopaholic as a book. So I don't know if it necessarily relates. I mean, my research is less about like the moral panic of this, but a lot of people are kind of more interested in that side of things. And like whether this is like okay or not, which is more of a moral question than like an academic question. But I'm not sure if this is answering your question.
No, it is, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I do think there's a very interesting like, why do women want their books to look like they're addressed to teenagers? And there's a completely parallel side of this happening in like the romantasy side of things, which is another very popular genre on TikTok. I'm rambling a bit. But yeah, I don't know if I exactly have an answer for that. I think it's a very interesting question to bring up. And now I have questions in my own head that I want to explore.
Thank you. Your presentation was amazing.
Thank you.
I think we have time for one last question, and I see it right here.
Question about, I've read some of these books. They're fun. But that in some of the books, you talk about how the male lead is often sort of like emotionally detached or seemingly emotionally attached at the beginning, and that plays into, or in the Grumpy Sunshine trope specifically. But I wanted to ask about, in quite a few Grumpy Sunshine books, there's also a third character that's introduced, a second sort of male lead who's not quite the male lead, but is like initially introduced as the perfect man, as someone who is like very sort of emotionally attentive and who never really ends up being the one who is actually the good person in the book. And I just wanted to ask about how you thought that related to the overall idea of heteropessimism, with this other male character who seems to satisfy all the desires to begin with, ending up being the one who's more of the asshole.
Yeah, that's a very good point to bring up. I would argue that in those cases, I mean, you're correct that many of these books have this like alternate love interest type character who's presented as like the perfect guy, that the female main character will reject, and then he turns out to be like secretly evil, or not. But I think what's interesting is in those cases, there's this like implication that the negative raw masculinity of being kind of like grumpy and unpleasant to be around is like an authentic state, whereas being sort of pleasant and nice and like attentive and thinking and thoughtful of the other character ends up being like a mask for something that's ultimately dark. And I do think, again, it's one of those examples of like kind of something that is inherently heteropessimistic, men who are completely emotionally detached, and then sort of reimagining that as meaning something better, where like at least you know what you're getting. And so, yeah, like I think that might be, would have been worth concluding in the presentation. But yeah, it's like kind of an ultimate example of choosing the sort of less validating male character because it's like more real and more grounded than like a happy male character who might be secretly hiding something insidious is. Yeah.
Great, wonderful. So I'll just hand it back to you in case you have any closing, anything you want to say. You're shaking your head no. Well, then thank you very much. What a fantastic presentation. Thank you, everyone. And that brings us to the end of our online version. Those of you in person, stick around because we still have some fun things to see around the space. Those of you online, but also those of you here, thanks for coming into For Space and activating all of these wonderful conversations. Everyone online, thank you for your contributions and for being here as well. We're going to be closing up the Zoom and the live stream now, but just a quick reminder that everything you've seen here today so far is available on YouTube if you'd like to revisit or share it. So thank you again, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.